Hello everyone, welcome back into another stream. So on last night's stream we played a bit of Signalis, which unfortunately I wasn't that big of a fan of. And the night before, the videos we watched were The Tragedy of the Divine Beast Dancing Lion by the Discerning Tarnished, then Elden Ring Lore, The Original Sin Revealed in Marika's Ancient Past by the Center Tarnished. Then we had What Was Marika's Original Sin? Elden Ring Lore by Garrulous Goldmask. Then we finished off with Lore of the Nameless Shaju Tree Tower and Mesmer's Secret Alliance by Hawkshaw. So in keeping with the theme of all of this sin and whatnot, I figured let's continue to commit cardinal sins by watching Sin Begets Sin, Marika, Shadow of the Erdtree and Power by The Backlog. Then after that, we have Metyr History Explained, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree Lore by Game Plus The Alchemist. Then following that, we have some more meta type stuff with Negative Shadow of the Erdtree Review by Ratatosker, which is going to be pretty funny, I'm sure. Then game design thoughts about Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree by Serlin on design. So somebody in the Discord, I think it was 2Hit, said that Serlin was a game developer, but I don't remember the details there, so maybe we'll get some of that lore drop as we check out his channel. So everybody, welcome back in with Dave, Jake Peterson, and the Truer Connoisseur active in the chat. Hope you're doing well. All right, so now with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive on into Sin Begets Sin, Marika, Shadow of the Erdtree and Power by The Backlog.
Upon taking my first steps into Gravesite Plain, I made the following note in the little journal that I keep by my side when playing something that I'll be talking about here on YouTube. Bitterness fills the air. A scorched town lies hidden beneath black drapes, an echo of the funerary veils that hang from the bleeding tree that dominates the horizon. This town is anonymized, hidden, covered up. This entire place is a shame, an embarrassment, a stain on the Golden Order.
I was about to say, oh, damn, that's going pretty far, but then he qualified with the Golden Order.
From the very first moments of Shadow of the Erdtree, FromSoftware's jaw-dropping environment art is communicating with you. I hesitate to call this environmental storytelling, firstly because I think we get very Bethesda-brained about that phrase, like it only refers to a skeleton reading Grognak the Barbarian on the toilet, but also because what's happening here feels more like curation. Before you ever read an item description, the Land of Shadow is telling you its story through vistas and landmarks. And I know that the DLC is doing this because my first impressions were right. The ideas that the game conveyed through this environmental curation are further detailed and confirmed by the written lore. Having read all of the item descriptions, because I'm a huge nerd, I can say with 100% confidence that the Land of Shadow is the shame and the embarrassment of Marika's Golden Order. It is the drain around which the things most detested by the God Queen circle. It's a cover thrown over a bloody history that she'd rather remain forgotten.
And this language that he's using right here kind of reminds me of how the Ringed City was described in Dark Souls 3 by the one pygmy when you first enter it, where it's like the lid to a privy or something like that. So there's something else that I wanted to say. What was he just saying? Right, so I'm curious as to why he thinks it's an embarrassment as opposed to something else. A history forgotten.
The immortal head of a perfect order cannot be tarnished by a humble past. Power must maintain an air of unassailability so that its right to enforce order remains unquestioned. A forever war rages in the Land of Shadow, at Marika's behest. Her large adult son, Mesmer, wreaks a terrible vengeance on the Hornsent, a people indigenous to this place who did Marika and her kin an unforgivable wrong. The Hornsent worship at the altar of the Crucible, a primeval font of life energy in the lands between, and are the precursors to the Omen kin of Marika's time. Despite the fog of war and death that hangs over the Land of Shadows, though, it is also a place of birth and of beginnings. The Fingers, envoys of an inscrutable god from beyond the stars, hail from this place.
I appreciate the Godslayer Greatsword choice of weaponry. Actually, I wonder, is Metyr weak to fire like the Finger Creepers, or no? I haven't tried it.
This is where Marika's people, the Newman, first arrived in the Lands Between from their home far away. The Erdtree, the Golden Order, and even Marika's very divinity were all born here. This is where she split life from death, where the Golden Order fell about the Lands Between like a constricting net. And so, to Marika and her Golden Order, the Land of Shadows is a necessary embarrassment, an important shame. Ultimately, Elden Ring's DLC is all about power, about the cost of wielding it and what it means to uphold it. It's about death and life and cycles of violence, about a dynasty with humble beginnings and an ignoble end. It's about sin, begetting sin, begetting sin. Over the next few months, I'll be doing a series of videos about Elden Ring and power, with this first one focusing on Marika, her origins, and how power itself is what enables evil. Today, I'll pick through the remains of a world that has buckled under the weight of an imposed, artificial order, and mourn the death of an evil civilization. This is not a lore video.
Oh yeah, it seems like it. So there's a couple points that I wanted to make. The first was... Damn it, I lost my train of thought. Where was it? I should have taken an actual note. This is not helping me. Damn it, there's a timeline thing. It wasn't that big a deal, which is kind of why I let it fly as he made the point. But anyway. Going back to this guy's style, I think it is pretty good for YouTube. It's not one that I'm particularly fond of because it's so heavy on the prose and he's not really substantiating some of his claims by like with his support for them quite yet, which is fine. It's a stylistic difference, and in many ways this kind of reminds me of the way like Vadi wrote his scripts for like the Prepare to Cry series and whatnot. And then Fake Name, welcome into the stream. How's it going? What is this?
When I say this isn't a lore video, I do genuinely mean that. Not in the traditional sense, at least. While I will be picking apart the story of the DLC, I wanted to do that without heavily referencing item descriptions and without focusing too much on the mechanical how of the world.
Uh-oh. Now I'm worried. Hey, how's it going?
What I'll be doing instead is using the environmental storytelling and imagery of the expansion to explore the story's themes and mood, as well as to dive into its characters. I want you to come away from this video feeling the story more strongly, instead of just knowing exactly how the magic works, or having heard a more precise chronology of the history of the Lands Between. The reason I've done things this way, firstly, is that I didn't feel like the granular detail that I picked up from the item descriptions contributed as much to my investment in the DLC's plot as its mood, music, and general gestalt vibe did. And what's the point in me reading you off item descriptions that I didn't always connect with? I didn't always care so much about litigating the minutiae of the world that way. And I think as a creator it would be rude of me to expect you to care about that if I didn't. I think I owe it to you guys, in a way, to put in the effort to articulate what did resonate with me, even if that constitutes a little bit more work. And more words. Oh my god, this video took a really long time to write. Like and subscribe. Secondly, as I've talked about before on the channel, I think a kind of philosophy of lore hunting has sprung up around these games that kind of stifles the ways that we can talk about them. Whew, that's a really long sentence.
Well, this might feel a little bit awkward for me because I'm like, somebody called me like the content cop of lore videos. I don't really know how I feel about that because I never watched Content Cop, but generally the way that I try to approach this is to come from a place of like constructive criticism and generally open-mindedness, and I do try to take in what the videos offer on their own terms to an exception, but of course, for longtime viewers of the channel, you guys know that I take exception for when I think things deviate a bit too far from the text, or when I think the themes or systems that content creators are presenting bring rise to inconsistencies, which make their viewpoints incompatible with the text. So I am kind of not like hesitant, but what's the word? Apprehensive to see where this goes. I mean, so far there really haven't been many major issues at all. So crossing my fingers. What are you doing? Oops.
I think a philosophy of lore hunting has sprung up around these games that kind of stifles the ways that we can talk about them by virtue of focusing too heavily on decoding item descriptions for immutable truths. This tweet from Austin Walker succinctly sums up a lot of my problems with how we talk about From's games, and I talk more in depth about the same stuff in the Dark Souls 3 video I made back in January. The link to...
Alright, let me back up and read that tweet because I have no idea what this is about. So, Ziostorm says, saw this Mikola theory on TikTok and thought it was pretty interesting. Thoughts? There's a common misconception about the curse that afflicts kindly Mikola. He's not cursed with eternal youth, but with nascency. Oh, God, YouTube.
Too heavily on decoding item descriptions for immutable truths. This tweet from...
He's not cursed with eternal youth, but with nascency. This means that nothing he starts will ever come to fruition. His Halic tree never grew to rival the Erdtree. He never cured his sister Millennia. He never revived Godwyn, and he never ushered in his age of compassion. His eternal youth is merely a symbol of his inability to complete anything. Tomato, tomato to me. But anyway, Austin Walker replied to Ziostorm's tweet with, it's exhausting that the fan culture of these games has taught people to present ideas like this as lore theories, which leads the conversation into wiki comment style debate about narrative truth and intent instead of as a well-grounded characterological interpretation. Well, I guess I wish I knew exactly what he wanted instead. But I mean, part of the reason why I think the fan community tends to call these types of ideas lore theories is so that way you're not stepping on anybody's toes, and because these games are still kind of like living, breathing pieces of literature in many ways, that they can continually be updated and there's still a kind of ongoing life to them, which makes it a little bit more difficult putting all of your eggs into one basket. And because of that, I think people tend to be a bit more amenable to the idea of retcons or things changing that they may have thought was one way and ended up turning out to be another. So like one example with like the Nameless King being the Gwyn's firstborn child as opposed to like Solaire or things like that. So Matthew Sargent, welcome back in. You interpreted his growth after his removal of St. Trina as the game's way of communicating that she was the reason for his lack of growth, like something was slumbering inside him due to her presence. That's interesting.
Austin Walker succinctly sums up a lot of my problems with how we talk about From's games, and I talk more in depth about the same stuff in the Dark Souls 3 video I made back in January. The link to that one is in the description if you want to hear me warble about that stuff through a chest infection for 25 minutes. Besides all of that though, the impression that I got from the Land of Shadow was that instead of a Rubik's Cube to be solved, I was supposed to be looking at it as an art gallery, which was easy. Just look at it.
Oh, that's so much louder. Holy crap. Let me turn that down.
Bask in the glory of the Shadow Tree, baby. Whee! The different regions and locations are like exhibitions in a museum. They're each deliberately curated and laid out. We're encouraged to explore them. It's like the game is begging us to interact with them, to figure out what we think and we feel about them and the stories that they're trying to tell us. Now, I still don't know whether Marika's journey is the best place to begin illustrating all of this pretentious garbage I've been talking about, but it's where I want to start, as near the beginning as I can. And where it began was in a meadow filled with wildflowers, in a quaint village where a woman called Marika lived. Maybe more than anything else, Elden Ring is the tale of what she left behind, how the leaves that fell in her wake tell a story.
The Spirited Away Shamans.
In a tiny armory that maybe used to be a chapel at the foot of Mesmer's Black Tower, a prayer reads, "Have mercy for the spirited away shamans." A statue of Marika looms over this holy space. She stands tall, intimidating, arms outstretched above her as though preaching to a congregation. Correctly prostrating yourself at her feet, and I get the sense that this part was maybe one of Miyazaki's contributions to the story, causes the statue to move aside, revealing...
It's kind of funny, because if this dude is trying to say that he's not a lorehead, making a Miyazaki foot joke doesn't help him beat the allegations.
A secret tunnel. Rolling hills lay green and speckled with flowers on its other side. Erdtree sentinels patrol those gentle rises on horseback, guarding what must, to them, be an ancient and very sacred place. Cresting the hills, you'll come upon a meadow bathed in warm golden light. As you draw closer, a gentle melody plays, the notes hanging on the unmoving air like dust motes suspended in a sunbeam. The eagle-eared among you might notice that these notes are among the very first sounds you ever heard of Elden Ring, either from the game's announcement trailer back in 2019 or from its main menu. This quiet, simple tune represents Marika. It's her song. It's a softness that gets overridden by grandeur, a humble beginning overshadowed by a violent conclusion. The cacophony of brass and fury that drowns it out is Radagon's music. Music for battle, masculine and overbearing. And just to prove my point, Marika's song doesn't play in the final confrontation with Radagon at the end of the game. Suspended, impaled in the Erdtree, Marika is gone by then. She's been rendered a mere...
I was gonna say I don't know about tying the brass to Radagon, but I guess what he just said right there can kind of help make that idea make more sense to me. And since I paused that, I do want to say that one of my favorite parts about going up to the shaman village and hearing that piece is that not only is it somber, it's a lone instrument, which kind of, I think, helps speak to the mentality of Marika when she returned to her village and left her tree, even though there would be no one there for it to heal. Feels bad, man.
Her vessel for power, made into an object, her body used by Radagon, and the music of the fight reflects that with her theme's absence. I want to just detour for a second to ask, does Marika deserve that fate? There's definitely something
So this doesn't really pertain to what he's saying, but it does bother me that we've got like the super gold leaves on the inside of the Erdtree. They do kind of look like what you get in near a limb, but they don't really resemble the leaves anywhere else, which is a little bit strange. I guess they don't really have to make a ton of sense. I also guess leaves don't grow inside a tree, but yeah, I think the near a limb leaves are a brighter, maybe not brighter, but a lighter shade of gold and whatnot. And then, hey, Corn, how's it going? And then, Ufer Larnson, welcome in. You love the Solaire, the first child idea so much the Nameless King came out and depressed you hard. My condolences, my man. How do you feel about that whole Karthus Sandworm Solaire connection then? That the Sunlight Maggot went on to become something grander and more grossly incandescent. Matthew says, there's a difference between making sense and continuity, though. Would you elaborate? I'm curious. Oh, wait. Okay. Yeah, would you elaborate? I'm curious as to what you're speaking towards specifically.
poetic about it in a very Greek tragedy kind of way. Marika spent her life acting as an implement for power, a vessel and a catalyst furthering the interests of a force that she neither knew nor understood. When she tried to rebel against that by shattering the Elden Ring, her true smallness was made clear. By the end of her life, she was being borne along by the historical inertia of her decisions as much as anything else. Her cooperation was barely ever necessary. She remains a vessel for power, even as a petrified, unresponsive corpse. Did the monstrous choices that she made when she still could choose buy this fate? I think that's a question worth bearing in mind as we talk more about Marika's youth, and it's one that the game leaves unanswered for us to ponder.
So just looking at it from an aerial view, for some reason, these leaves kind of reminded me of the one nine-tail fox QB looking ass attack that Metyr does, where it like leaves like the pinkish purplish trail on the ground, but I think it's distinct enough that it doesn't matter. And I don't really remember the leaves looking like they formed any particular shape, so it's probably doesn't really matter. You just mean that while games don't necessarily have to make sense, they should at least not make sense in a way that is consistent throughout the game. That's fair. So I think you were talking about the continuity of the leaves then, more specifically, as opposed to something else I said. Okay. And then Global Sequence, nice to see you again. And Karthus Sandworm gets the rule of cool for you. Karthus Solaire. I kind of hate the theory. I mean, it's funny enough that there is certainly a rule of cool element to it, but I don't know. I just don't really get sunlight maggot vibes from that sandworm, personally.
I think that's a question worth bearing in mind as we talk more about Marika's youth, and it's one that the game leaves unanswered for us to ponder.
Nectarine says, would you
Regardless,
still summon me if I was
this
a
music
worm?
always implied something about...
Nah, because I don't summon at all. Get stepped on. Hey, Queen Marika Lover, nice to see you again.
Marika, I think. A gentleness maybe, a sense of faded, nostalgic tragedy that contrasts with the all-powerful god queen she became. It always felt a little out of place next to Radigan's theme, but in the context of this glade, here amidst the stillness, it finally makes sense. This is the place of small beginnings, and it's here that the music belongs. The golden light filling the air radiates from a sapling, standing alone and defiant in the face of the Shadow Tree, a symbol of death. The golden sapling radiates a gentle, healing blessing, and yet there's nobody left here to be healed.
And for whatever reason, this sapling in particular kind of reminds me of what's emblazoned on like the Erdtree and Surcoat crest, or on like a lot of the relief sculptures for the Erdtree and whatnot. Which, I mean, oh, go figure, this tree looks like a tree in other depictions. But I don't know, that's just kind of what has come into my mind as I've looked at it before. It is really weird that, I don't know, just like its general appearance isn't as spectral as I would have imagined it would have looked if it's based off of a real Erdtree. This also does make me wonder if there's any Two Fingers connection to this, or how the incantation that we can use may differ from whatever Marika did to create this thing. Why does it only remain as a sapling? Like, why hasn't it become gigantic? I don't know. How is the DS1 music so darn perfect for lore videos? So I'm assuming you're saying that, you know, pretty offhandedly. And I think the unironic answer is that the Dark Souls 1 music is a lot more somber and atmospheric in nature, and it isn't overbearing in many regards, so that makes it a little bit easier to have on in the background for lore vids. And then Drew Wang, nice to see you. You think it was a miss that the Erdtree sapling doesn't actually heal you if you're in the vicinity? True story. At least I could like headcanon that maybe it's too small to heal other things. Well, no, I guess no, because that incantation kind of would imply otherwise. I take it back. All right.
Defiant in the face of the Shadow Tree, a symbol of death. The golden sapling radiates a gentle, healing blessing, and yet there's nobody left here to be healed. This village has a feeling of smallness. It's beautiful and serene and desperately sad. Beyond the sapling and atop the hill, a woman's likeness is hewn into a twisted, knotted old tree, just as the remembrances of notable figures are now hewn into the Erdtree. She kneels, her arms outstretched in front of her, as though to welcome a child into her embrace. Marika left parts of herself in this place with this carved lady, a braid of her hair, and her restraint. What remains here is her vision for the world, realised in miniature, a world where no one would ever need to suffer, where death was nothing to fear. where she would never have to lose anyone again. Marika wanted to build a place where all wounds could be healed, all wrongs righted. Coming from a character that we know is murderous, brutal, ruthless, genocidal even, it's a disarmingly innocent and naive dream. The whispered wish of someone frightened and alone. Just how did Marika come to be alone, though? We know that she and her people were known as the Newmans, so how did this place come to be called the Shaman Village? And where were those poor shamans spirited away to?
A Bonnie Doom.
Bonnie Village is hard to find. It's a well-kept secret within a well-kept secret. It's tucked away on a cliffside
Get it? Because it's a well.
below Shadow Altus, the plateau atop which Mesmer's Keep sits. You access the village by travelling through a secret tunnel beneath the ruins of a larger settlement just off Morth Highway, although Bonnie Village was obviously never nearly as grand as its sister town. Its dwellings were wooden, its streets overshadowed by oppressive cliffs. Despite being a smaller, hidden offshoot of a larger town, it's still much larger than the Shaman Village, and when I first found it I got angry at Marika for the first time. You see, I arrived here long before I found the Shaman Village, and I thought Bonnie Village was a sort of rejoinder to Jarburg, the cosy little hamlet in the base game where these adorable little jar people live. Jarburg is one of the last places in the Lands Between where life seems to be just going on as best it can, an honest-to-God settlement with these peculiar little fellas just pottering around and minding their own business.
So even the captions have it as pottering, which I don't know if he said that intentionally or if he just meant puttering, but that is a brilliant play on words, whether intended or not.
These peculiar little fellas just pottering around and minding their own business. While the Jars have some cultural practices that probably seem a little odd to our outside perspective, such as eating the flesh of the valiant dead, their home is peaceful and its inhabitants are friendly. When I found this little place, adorably called Bonnie Village, and saw the Jars piled high in shattered mounds, the shades of the dead weeping over them, I was upset. You know, it's an upsetting image, the devastated aftermath of wanton destruction. Why would Marika order this? Why would she have Mesmer commit such an atrocity against a place as peaceful as Jarburg? Unlike the Shaman
And keep in mind, everybody, this was his first impression, so...
Village, no one has built a monument to those who suffered here. No golden Erdtree bathes this place in healing light. Bonnie Village has instead been completely anonymized, reduced to ash. So why was the pain of those who lived here less worthy of commemoration than that of Marika and her people? What gave Marika the right to do all of this? I'd previously taken a pretty sympathetic stance on Marika as a character, viewing her more as a tragic figure rather than an out-and-out villain. But being confronted by this carnage shook that feeling. Maybe I'd made a mistake, maybe she really was just a one-note bad guy. But what I'd misunderstood most deeply of all was just what Bonnie Village really was. Bonnie Village was a Horn-sent concentration camp, built to house an underclass of criminals and captives raised up like lambs for slaughter. Unlike the Jar people of the Lands Between, the Horn-sent had no compunction with filling their jars with the flesh of those still living, in seemingly torturous fashion. On the outskirts of the village stands the Whipping Hut, stark and bleak in the shadow of the jagged peak across the bay. A Horn-sent spirit here chastises a long-dead shaman, one of Marika's spirited away kin, telling her that she was only ever accorded life so that she might ascend to sainthood inside one of these jars. The spirit flayed her with a putrid whip, knotted with teeth, and stuffed her into a pot alongside the living flesh of criminals so that she might achieve some sort of closeness to divinity. What a horrific fate, what awful cruelty to inflict in the name of grasping at the divine. With the way this spirit talks, the Hornsent even seemed to believe that they were doing Marika's people some sort of favour by bringing them closer to God in this way.
And that is unfortunate that calling them saints kind of leads people into this interpretation, because the Japanese is just a little bit closer to be a good girl, get in the pot, life were you accorded for this alone, essentially. So kind of a big difference there.
It's gross. Below the village, in the ghoulishly named Bonnie Jail, we see what the sainthood promised by the horn scent really entails. So this hell was where Marika's people were spirited away to, and this horror is what befell them. She was seemingly the only one to escape, and it stands to reason that she fled to the nearby Finger Ruins. It was there that she must have made communion with a god from the black abyss of space.
Hold on, let me listen to that last line again.
And this horror is what befell them. She was seemingly the only one to escape, and it stands to reason that she fled to the nearby Finger Ruins. It was there that she must have made communion with a god from the black abyss of space, who seduced her with a temptation that she couldn't refuse. The means to strike back, a way to build the world she'd envisioned, where nothing could ever be taken from her again.
Alright, so I figure this is probably going to be the points in the video where we have like pretty big disagreements, because our guy said he likes to go based off of vibes, and obviously I much rather prefer the text, so I'll either just like hate it or I'll just shut up and grit my teeth, I suppose. And then Korn said, that more accurate translation reminds you of how a cult of polygamous Mormons told young girls they had to keep sweet. Could you elaborate on what you mean by keep sweet? Because I feel like I've heard that before somewhere, but anyway. Matthew said, that localization almost makes it more relatable to a Western audience. Religious cruelty is often accompanied by sincerely good intentions. I get that, but my issue is that it inadvertently leads people into thinking that the shaman are more base than they are, and that they can arise to a higher station through being jarred, essentially. Don't elaborate? Okay. Just be good. Okay. That's what I thought. Keep sweet, be good. Okay. And then Nectarine says, it seems unlikely that she was the only one who survived. Right. I mean, we don't have enough info about Marika to say whatsoever. It really sucks because there's so many questions pertaining to her, the Two Fingers, Malekith, Metyr, Placidusax and his god, Godfrey, and even her first children, whomever you may believe those to be, that we just never really get information about. And then Iron Lung, welcome in. Here for the vibes. Mine or his? Anyway.
It offered her the power to spread that golden, healing kindness to everyone, and to wreak her vengeance on those who'd wronged her. It offered her a path to godhood.
Divinity and revenge.
What a sweet revenge it must have been for Marika, to make contact with the greater will, to brandish the Elden Ring from atop the tower of Aniralim, and to give the devout Hornsent a true close encounter with divinity. She took the Hornsent's supremacy from them, took away their ability to cause harm by subjecting others to their beliefs. She even vandalized their divine crucible by splitting it in two, peeling the Erdtree from the Shadow Tree, life from death. She didn't simply beat the Hornsent, she reordered the very rules of the world.
Alright, so with him saying splitting the crucible into two, it seems as though he's referring to the Erdtree rather than this thing specifically. And part of the reason why I bring this up is because I do know that some people believe that this could be the crucible, or it could have represented the crucible at some point in time, and just trying to entertain the notion of this thing being one, which isn't necessarily what he's arguing, but just trying to think about that a bit more. Obviously, because of the story trailer showing it kind of already split in two by the time Marika ascends the steps, does make me reticent to believe such a thing, but I still think it's an interesting idea that even this thing could have been one at one point, which again is not what they're trying to argue here, but I was just thinking about it a bit more.
Pulling the rug out from under their feet in a way more audacious, comprehensive and radical than they ever could have imagined. The Gate of Divinity atop the Hornsent Tower of Bellarat was the site of Marika's ascension to godhood, as depicted in this scene from the DLC story trailer. We can see that back then the gate was alive, writhing and wriggling. Perhaps it was another attempt by the Hornsent to touch divinity, built on the still living bodies of their flayed victims. Perhaps Marika's use of the gate to achieve godhood is the betrayal that the trailer mentions. Surely some of those suffering bodies belonged to her people, or at least those who'd suffered the same fate.
So with him saying that these folks were flayed, it just kind of made me think about like the potential Godskin connection. And I don't necessarily want to talk about that, but I was just having the idea earlier today, like maybe I should make a mirror board / video detailing what would happen or what it would imply if we took everything presented by the lore at face value and see how it fits together and what parts don't fit into such a I don't know, cursory reading, I guess.
The gate was built on the pain of those she had set out to avenge, and yet she used their torment to empower herself and enable her new order. The entire tower is seemingly constructed from the screaming corpses of the Hornsent's victims, shaped into the stone against their will. It's a brutal visual metaphor for the ways that those in power elevate themselves by stepping on and over the downtrodden. Power is not an abstract instrument that's just held, after all.
Yeah, and I'm still not sure how I feel about these figures because they seem too far removed from reality for me to believe that they were actual corpses, but I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff about the game world where I could imagine that they are real corpses, but then if they are, that leads me into having so many questions about the construction of Belgorod, which I guess I already have those questions to begin with, but it's just, I really don't want to complicate things more than they already are. The Hornsent were big into metaphorical architecture. I mean, to be fair, as I was like, oh, the architecture is complicated, it doesn't exactly truly support itself by its own weight, by the standards of reality. So who's to say that these things couldn't have been people at one point?
Power is only of use when it's held over another. To hold power is to perform power. It's not only the act of stepping on others, it's the ability to do so. By using this place, this monument to inequality and suffering, I think we're meant to understand that Marika was betraying the memory of her people, or at the very least using their pain as intended by those who inflicted it. The opening of the
So Matt had an interesting comment of maybe it's actually stone becoming people rather than people becoming stone, just spitballing. I really like that idea. I just don't think it works with the way that the bodies are oriented, like looking as though they're climbing up towards something or like being like lifted up towards something. If they were all like coming out of the stone a bit more, like Kira's a little bit better, but not quite enough for me, I guess. Like if it looked like they were pulling themselves out of it rather than kind of being sucked into it or even like further up into the sky, I would be more inclined to believe that.
The Gate of Divinity is the same shape as Marika's Great Rune, which, to me, seems to indicate that her power is an echo of the same forces that
I can see that if you look at it with the negative space. I was like, what is he talking about? But yeah, I think I can kind of get what he's getting at.
oppressed her people. Sin begets sin begets sin. The cycle continues. The birth of Marika's Golden Order hit the tower like a bomb. The writhing corpses that made up the gate were instantly incinerated, leaving crumbling, ashen facsimiles in their place. The Grace of Gold may be a guiding light for the tarnished, a gentle healing miracle in the shaman village, but here it became a weapon, blinding and fiery and ferocious, burning away the sin and the hubris of the Hornsent. They thought to build their tower to the heavens, their very own Babel, but a newborn god showed them their folly. The idea of something gentle, beautiful, or otherwise innocent being corrupted by war and suffering is actually all over the DLC. The divine beast that you fight in Lower Belgorod was born from a cultural tradition of the Hornsent that was turned into a weapon of war during Mesmer's crusades. Likewise, the poisoned hand is a weapon that's stitched from the skins of genocide victims. The fallout of power trauma and war and suffering can turn beautiful things, even mundane things like faith, culture, our very bodies, into deadly weapons.
Choice and consequence. Hey, Jameson Ferdinand, welcome in. Who are all those people? They seem to just be nondescript hornsent who may have been used for some kind of ritual to ascend someone or something to divinity, whether that be Marika or Marika and something before her is unknown.
The immortal head of a perfect order cannot be tarnished by a humble past. Power must maintain an air of unassailability, and order must be enforced. Marika wanted to build a better world, a kinder world, a world without death or suffering or pain, but change is not cheaply bought. When Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, she didn't get rid of it altogether. I suspect she couldn't. In the base game, we learn that she hid the Rune of Death away in the sword of her half-brother Malekith as a threat to be brandished against her enemies. Just so, death itself didn't simply vanish from the world, it too was hidden away, disguised beneath the funerary veils of the Land of Shadow. All manners of death unacceptable to Marika now gather in the Land of Shadow to be suppressed by Mesmer's forever war. It is a necessary embarrassment. An important shame. Marika didn't remove death, she just took ownership of it. She decided when and how people got to die, and she thought she was doing them a kindness. She had a monopoly over this power, and felt entitled to give it to her brother, her enforcer, to use as a weapon. This reminded me of the way that the state, in real life, the state, has a monopoly over the use of physical violence through armed police forces. I've largely been presenting this story from Marika's perspective thus far. Was she not justified in seeking revenge on the Hornsent for what was done to her people? Was she not right to try and build a better world? Should she not have used the Gate of Divinity to ensure the suffering of her people wasn't in vain? In casting down her oppressors, Marika took on their mantle. She used their tools and was seduced by the allure of power and divinity just as they were. In The Lord of the Rings, the titular ring works in a similar way. It doesn't matter whether it's wielded by a pure soul, wielding it at all is the root of the corruption. It cannot achieve positive ends. Marika might have had good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with those, or so I'm told. Her Golden Order is just an echo of the Hornsent's tyranny, the same elements reshaped and remoulded. The leaders change, the underclass changes, but the relationship that both of those groups have with power remains.
It's funny because earlier in the auto captions, Fallout was capitalized, and I'm like, war never changes. Anyway, Ulfer said, you always felt this whole area looks like there's a disaster or something happened, then people are just trying to escape it by climbing upward. I could see what you mean by that, and there are certain amounts of visual similarities between the Gate of Divinity and what you can kind of get in Yahar'gul and the Nightmare of Mensis from Bloodborne. Because for anybody who may not have played Bloodborne because of, PS4 issues and whatnot, there's a section of a hidden part of the town that has people that have been sucked into the walls, and they're trying to climb out as though they're running away from something, which is pretty horrifying. And they all kind of look petrified and mummified, similarly to these Hornsent corpses right here. Then he says, there's a whole section of Belierot's inner walls that are piled up with sand. You wonder if that used to be a city area too, or if they planned ahead to hold all the sand from Metyr limb. I don't know. And then Jameson asks, doesn't Godwin own the Rune of Death? No. So what had happened was Marika gave Malekith the Rune of Death, and then Ronnie broke off a piece of it, and she used it to kill Godwin, and she died as well for whatever reason we don't know. And The fragment which Ronnie used broke into two pieces, one part getting embedded into her flesh, and then the other part getting embedded into Godwin's flesh. And then from the Godwin flesh rune, we have Deathroot sprout up. So it's kind of all over the place at this point. You're welcome. And then Matthew says, it looks to you like there are two layers of bodies. The bodies you can break in the arena all have horns, but the ones without the horns are permanent fixtures and look older. Yeah, and I wonder if part of that is just resource management and attention to detail, but I don't know whether it's supposed to have been like two genocidal type events or not.
In the same way that inclusion in the Golden Order was strategic and political, the exclusion of the Omen and those who live in death from the light of her grace was also strategic, as well as spiteful. Marika, like the Hornsent, built her cities on the bodies of an underclass that she not only maintained, but added to as needed. Marika was a victim of the brutality of the Hornsent, and this no doubt influenced her decision to shun the Omen of her time, but she was also a ruthless and canny leader. We know that the Greater Will was largely an absentee god, and so the responsibility for her atrocities and the unjust society that she created must be borne by Marika alone.
Shadow of the Erdtree.
In a very propagandistic sense, the Hornsent and the Land of Shadows are living reminders of the indignity of Marika's beginnings, of the high price and the dark deeds that paved the way for the rise of the Golden Order. The ongoing ruination of the Land of Shadow and the continued oppression of the Hornsent are the price that Marika pays to bathe the lands between in her light. The forever war that Mesmer wages is the labour that enforces her unnatural order. Perhaps Marika told herself that her intentions were purely noble, that the sacrifice of the Hornsent was required to build a better world. But we must wonder at her wrath and her spite. We have to wonder whether she is now any different to that spirit at the whipping shack, sacrificing a shaman to push for a divinity that she didn't believe in. What do you think now? Did Marika deserve her fate? Let me know your thoughts on the philosophy of punishment in the comments section below.
Okay, I thought the video was over for a second. I was like, oh, that's kind of abrupt. I mean, you reap what you sow. I don't know about deserving or anything, but anyway.
So, the Land of Shadow is a necessary embarrassment. It is a home and a source for the constructed underclass, the place for undesirables and secrets. They live in the shadow cast by the Erdtree's brilliance. The Land of Shadow is an important shame. Marika burns it to warm the lands between by its embers, as a vigil torch to remember her lost kin by, and to have her eternal revenge on those who wronged her. Perhaps most importantly, she burns the Land of Shadow to erase her humble beginnings, to conceal the fact that her pact with the Greater Will was one of desperation, and to perform dominance over that history and the dangerous truths that it holds. Marika, as the immortal head of a perfect order, is tarnished by a humble
Alright, so the music is a little bit loud compared to his voice.
past. Her power is not unassailable. This is evidenced by the fact that Marika assailed the previous system of power. And most importantly, her right to enforce her order is questionable. Ultimately, in spite of all the horrific things that they did, I don't think that the Hornsent were evil. I don't think that Marika was evil either, really.
So I'm curious what he means by Marika's right to enforce her order, because that can really color one's perspective of somebody else's interpretation of the game if he doesn't want to talk about lore interpretations. So Jameson always wondered what that red spear was in the final fight. I do too. I think for a lot of simplicity's sake, it would make sense that if it was a fragment of the Rune of Death, but then it would also call into a bunch of questions. Why another fragment of the Rune of Death wasn't in Malekith if it was embedded into Marika? Is that like what became of the sword that we essentially took from Malekith at the end of his fight? Did it go into the Erdtree to stab Marika even more? That'd be kind of messed up, but who knows? And then he thinks if the other bodies are shamans, it would make sense for them to be more melded into the gates and the floor. I don't know about the floor, but I can see what you mean by that. Hey, Paisa, nice to see you again. And then he said, no one's going to sail Marika while I'm her lord. All right. Not even Ranny.
We see glimpses of beauty in the Hornsense culture. The lion dance, for one. It's sad that that practice was perverted by war. We hear the Hornsent who serves Mikola talk about wreaking his revenge on Marika in much the same way that she had her vengeance on his people. Sin begets sin begets sin. I think that both the Hornsent as a culture and Marika as an individual are, in a fittingly George Martin-y kind of way, murky and complicated and morally grey. I understand them both, and I think they both did evil things because they were afforded the power to do so. I think what Shadow of the Erdtree wants us to understand about power is that it enables people to indulge their worst impulses and to impose their will upon the unwilling. Marika's order, for all its distinctions and gilding, for all her good intentions, is functionally the same as the culture of the Hornsent. It's dependent upon oppression, upon dehumanization, on keeping one group in the shadows to benefit those who the powerful allow to stand in the light. The power to impose an order on others is the problem. The Shadow Tree and all it represents, chaos, death, suffering, war, genocide, oppression, these things are all each the shadow of the Erdtree, the necessary flip side of the Golden Order.
Hold on, let me listen to that line again just to be on the same page.
Tree and all it represents, chaos, death, suffering, war, genocide, oppression, these things are all each the...
So death, chaos, war, suffering, genocide all represent the shadow. I can see what he means by that with a metaphorical reading.
Shadow of the Erdtree, the necessary flip side of the Golden Order. Bellarat Tower may have Bonny Village, but Leyndell has its shunning grounds. Marika wanted to overthrow and overshadow a cruel world by panning the good parts of life like golden nuggets from a riverbed, and building a new order from those alone. Pain and death remain in the silt. The cost of Marika's kind future, her good world, is a worse one left in her wake. And this is the tragedy of Marika for me, and it's the reason that, even with all that we've learned about her sins from the DLC, she's still my favourite character. Like, my god, she's so good. She's almost all-powerful, but impotent. She's proud, imperious, capable, but at the same time crippled by shame. She's vulnerable and naive. I hate her, and yet I grieve her losses. I understand the anguish she must have felt when she bore 2 Omen children. How violated she must have felt to be reminded of those who took from her so much in such an intimate way. And yet I think the way that she treated Morgott and Mog was unforgivable. I imagine her horror and her grief at the death of Godwyn, her first perfect son. To quote Cersei Lannister, "What good is power if we can't protect the ones we love?" Marika is, in my opinion, one of the all-time great video game characters. She's layered and complex and tragic, and it's remarkable how little of that depth is conveyed through FromSoftware's famous item descriptions. We instead see where she came from, and then what she built. We tread through the leaves that fell in her wake. We hear about her from her family, we see how she was worshipped. We pick our way through the ruins of the civilization that she grew. We walk her path from that quiet meadow, from the unassuming and resilient sapling keeping watch over her past, all the way to the heart of the Erdtree, where she's no longer really herself anymore. We walk with her on a journey of loss, of being hollowed out by the pursuit of power until all you are is a vessel, your actions bearing your legacy out into time. next time on the channel.
Alright, so that was pretty interesting. I kind of don't really know how I feel about this video. This is a good video, don't get me wrong, but I just don't feel like I'm the target audience for it because it's a lot more of an appeal to emotion, but I don't know, maybe I'm dead on the inside and it doesn't affect me that much. So, anyway, I think it's interesting that Marika is his favorite character for a number of reasons, and I'm a little bit curious about how you guys in the chat feels about that, or feel about that rather. And then Without Horn says Morg yacht causes frenzy. Okay. And then Jameson said Morgott didn't deserve it. No matter what they did to him and his people, he still served the tree. At the end, yeah. I really wonder what exactly happened for Morgott and Moog to have been buried under the ground, essentially, and imprisoned by their shackles, yet for Morgott to still become the grace given. And the fact that he's kind of recognized as the true Lord of Leyndell is a little bit weird, considering how much people seem to hate the Omen. And to be fair, a decent chunk of that was kind of left on the cutting room floor, I guess. But a lot of the details about the actual events of the Shattering War remain mystifying, with Millennia, Radon, and Godric, and just who assaulted whom, where, and when in the timeline. And of course, some of that stuff isn't ultimately all that important, but it is a little bit strange to me that well, maybe this kind of makes more sense now with the DLC. That I was gonna say, it doesn't make much sense to me initially that that Millennia would spare Godric after defeating the old blouse or whatever Kenneth calls him, but then she goes on to fight Radon. Well, I was like, that didn't make sense to me initially, but now it might make more sense in that maybe she was only acting on Miquella's whim or on his behalf. And if Miquella didn't really care about the whole Godric thing, or even the actual Elden Ring and his plans to ascend to divinity, then maybe I can kind of forgive that after all this time. And then Hilko says, we're in it for the lore. You guess there's nobody to contest it. Alright. As far as like putting the Omen kids underground, maybe. And then True Connoisseur says, of the main Mythos characters of Elden Ring, Marika's your favorite too. And then James said they were forced to because they're considered a disgrace. That's why Margit has part of his horns cut off. Godric was weak. Millennia felt pity and disgust. I mean, I feel like some of that stuff is beyond the text. And part of why I'm curious about the Omen twins is it ties to the birth order of all the demigod children, Mesmer included. Whether or not the Omens were born before Marika became a god with Godfrey as her lord, or after, or if Godwin was the first child, and is that why he is kind of golden and pure and whatnot? I am just really curious about all of that. Global said, if you were living in the lands between, you don't feel like you'd be one of the America's preferred people, and the feeling would be mutual. That said, anytime you go up with America cosplayer, you do the prayer gesture. Alright. So let's check out the rest of the video.
I'm going to be talking about one of Marika's children who attempted to undertake a similar journey. Miquella the Kind wanted to synthesize the kind of dehumanization that he saw as the road to power, as opposed to a necessary side effect of holding it. Miquella grew up towards the end of Marika's reign, when she was at her wit's end. The most powerful figure in Miquella's life was a distant and disengaged mother, and so next time I'll be talking about how Miquella sought that same distance from the world that he hoped to rule.
And so, calling her a distant and disengaged mother is questionable to me, because we know he had a good relationship with Radagon, at least. And of course, there's a ton of ambiguity about Marika being Radagon, but I'll leave that bit alone for now.
Be sure to subscribe and ding the bell to be notified once that drops, if YouTube decides to work, for a change. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. It took a really long time. I'd also just quickly like to say a big thank you to all the new subscribers who've joined in the last couple of months. Hearing your kind words on that old Marika video has been a wonderful experience, and I'm really, truly touched that so many of you have enjoyed it. See you next time.
What did George even do? All right. So, even though I said that this type of video isn't for me, I do think it was produced pretty well. I think it was well written and everything. I'm just, a little dead on the inside. A little tarnished, or is all. All right. So here is the link to that video if you want to give the backlog some support, or if you want to subscribe to him as well, you can feel free to do so there. So, with that one out of the way, let's go ahead and check out the next video on the list with Metyr History Explained, Elden Ring Lore, with Game Plus The Alchemist.
With the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, we were given a lot of quest lines.
Why is my YouTube's so bad? So bad. That's weird.
With the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, we were given a lot of quest lines. Perhaps one of the most important of them is Ymyr's quest line, a quest line dealing with our creation and providing very interesting implications. Yet I believe this quest was misunderstood by many people, which is really bad for the well-being of the lore community. The biggest misconceptions is regarding a new character, Metyr, the Mother of Fingers. Metyr and Ymir questline have been discussed in a couple
Corn says, oh no, not this guy? Oh no, what's that mean?
of great lore videos, so in this video we will not talk about it in the same manner. Instead, we will try to put new information with the old facts so we can clear some of the confusion. Specifically, we will talk about the Greater Will abandoning the lands between and the damage caused to Metyr. Did the damage actually sever the connection to the Greater Will, or is the two events disconnected? Is Ymir actually reliable? Who did this damage to Metyr? Who attacked the Mother of Fingers? And when did the Greater Will abandon the lands between? What is the relation between Metyr and the Elden Beast? Let me explain.
Yeah, so I think these are all very, very important questions, and I feel like the vast majority of them, it's just all guesswork as to the answers. He makes some wild leaps in Corn's opinion. It's all in good fun. Yeah, I kind of figured if he said he's going to kind of answer these questions, that he's probably going to take a bunch of leaps, but I'm not too familiar with the channel, so we'll see how it goes.
During Ymir questline, he tells us that Marika and the fingers that guided her were unhinged from the start. But in matter of fact, the truth lies deeper. It's their mother who is unhinged from the start. Metyr, the Mother of Fingers. This is what Ymir tells us, but after completing the entire quest and defeating Metyr, you will find that this isn't the entire truth. Metyr wasn't unhinged from the start. The Staff of the Great Beyond tells us that she indeed used to communicate with the Greater Will, unlike what Ymir tells us. This item reads as follows. The Mother received signs from the Greater Will from the beyond of the microcosm. Despite being abandoned and broken, she kept waiting for another message to come. So Ymir wasn't speaking the full truth. Yes, Metyr is abandoned and broken, yet she wasn't like that from the start. So the real question now is, when did she get damaged and abandoned? I believe those two events are actually separate. The Greater Will remained in the scene way after the arrival of Metyr. We know that for a fact. The final boss of Elden Ring is the Elden Beast, the vassal beast of the Greater Will and the living incarnation of the concept of order.
I do like the shots used for here. That's actually pretty cool. Yeah, I'll let him get back into his point. I do want to make a comment though, and I'm kind of already forgetting it.
Who later became the Elden Ring itself. From Metyr Remembrance, we can read she was actually the first star to be sent to the lands between. And from the Elden Star's incantation, we can read that, like Metyr, the Elden Beast was a star sent to the lands between as well. Putting those two facts together, we can come to the conclusion that the Elden Beast was sent after Metyr. Therefore, the Greater Will was still active at that time. Another clue of the Greater Will involvement is the banishment of the Nox. We can learn from the Nox armor that they invoked the ire of the Greater Will and
Alright, so yeah, going back before he goes too far on a different subject, he had mentioned that Metyr wasn't broken from the start because she had contact with the Greater Will, which I definitely get where he's coming from with that, but just to play a devil's advocate, it is also possible that because Metyr and the Fingers hate kowtowing to other things, they could have received directives from the Greater Will and then chose not to employ them and to have maybe done their own thing. And that could have been why Metyr lost contact with the Greater Will, but we don't really know. But anyway, if he does tie in Metyr to the Nox treason, I think there's a lot of reasons for thinking there should be a connection. I just don't know if they fully pan out.
for that they were banished deep underground. The Greater Will sent a third star, but this time this star was a malformed one, a beast of destructive force. Astel crashed into the eternal city of the Nox, which caused it to sink under the capital and stole their sky which was the center of their worship. But what did the
Now, I don't necessarily think this, but I'm just kind of pontificating here that what if the so-called betrayal by the Nox, and this isn't really relevant, what if the so-called banishment of the Nox to the underground coincides with Marika veiling away the land of Shadow? Just trying to think about the logistics of this. Marika veils the land, Greater Will gets angry, and then the Nox get banished. Because the Nox could have been of the Newman. I think this could work in a couple different ways. Even if the treason potentially happened when Placidusax's god was fled or whatnot, a lot of this stuff could potentially coincide, I guess. I don't really know how well it fits all together. I would have to really consider each component part in relation to each other, which is really annoying and a little bit beyond my mental capacity at the moment. And Stella and Tony, nice to have you guys again. And Tad Wrong, nice to see you. Maybe it lost contact with the Greater Will when the land was separated. So yeah, maybe. And that might coincide with what I was just talking about a moment ago. But Metyr's dumbass doesn't know how to get back to the lands between. A lot of this stuff is so strange.
The Nox do exactly to invoke such wrath from the Greater Will? Before the DLC was speculated, but now I believe we were given the answer. They attacked Metyr. In the base game, we can acquire an incredibly important item for Ranni, the Finger Slayer blade. Ranni used the blade to kill her two fingers. The blade can harm the Greater Will and its vassals. We can read here, this blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the Eternal City and symbolizes its downfall.
It sucks that it says that it's high treason, because I was just trying to imagine, what if there was already a god kind of set up before the arrival of Metyr and or the Elden Beast, and then what if the Elden Beast grabbed said god that like fought and killed some of them and eventually changed it into the Finger Slayer blade? But it's only high treason if they're going against a governing force. So this should not have been the governor.
Not be wielded by those without a faith, but it is said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals. Being the proof of the high treason committed by the Nox means that it's connected to what they did to invoke the wrath of the Greater Will. They wanted to stop the influence of the Greater Will on the lands between, so they can replace him with their Lord of Night. So they made that weapon to attack the two fingers, or that is what we saw. After learning of Metyr, I asked myself a question. If I wanted to harm the fingers, wouldn't it be more effective to attack Metyr herself? I mean, even if I killed as much fingers as I wanted, Metyr would still just give birth to more. So the most logical action for the Nox would be to attack Metyr herself with the blade. And indeed, when we find Metyr, she is heavily wounded where her womb is. We can even see her giving birth to more finger creepers from that place during our fight.
So going back to the whole idea of using the Finger Slayer blade to wound Metyr, I think that also brings up a lot of questions as to how the Finger Slayer blade even came to be. Because if it is supposed to be kind of analogous to Radagon's Sacred Relic Sword, where it's like the body of a deceased god essentially, that would imply that a deceased god and its body was used to kill Metyr, and then that brings up the question of where did that body come from? Was this like the Placidus Axe god that was then used to try and kill Metyr? That would be metal as hell to essentially kill God and then take its body to kill like an even other cosmic horror god inspiration type thing. And then Without Horn says maybe it's the Mother of Truth's body? Maybe. I don't know if I've said this on stream, but there's also the possibility that the Finger Slayer blade could correspond to Melena's body, especially if you think it's related to the Glowmite Queen at all. But, you know, a lot of that stuff is just really out there tinfoil theories. So anyway.
Is heavily wounded where her womb is. We can even see her giving birth to more finger creepers from that place during our fight. So here what I think happened. Metyr was attacked by the Nox. She got wounded, but she used her teleportation to get away. The Greater Will knew of the attack and got incredibly angry of the attack on his gleaming daughter. So he destroyed the Nox, but unfortunately the harm was already done. I believe after this point, Metyr was only able to produce unripe children, as Ymir stated, and therefore she was broken. Now for the abandoned part, I don't believe she was abandoned yet, mainly because we were told exactly when did the Greater Will abandon the lands between.
Alright, so thinking about this would place the treason before Marika's reign, I guess. Why did I come to that conclusion off of what he said? Hold on, let me back up. Oh, because the broken children, right. So yeah, if she was only producing broken children, that would tie into the mere quote of Marika's fingers being broken. So the treason happened before Marika's reign, according to this train of thought. Now, I don't know how well that aligns with the shaman village and whatnot, but I mean, we've got a lot of really weird questions about the Nox themselves that maybe they're just the same people in different locations.
As Ymir stated, and therefore she was broken. Now for the abandoned part, I don't believe she was abandoned yet, mainly because we were told exactly when did the Greater Will abandon the lands between.
The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering.
Why do I always forget that he says newfound strength in the intro? So that'll definitely be good ammo to use for when people like wonder how the demigods got their power and whether it was always like part of them, and why do the Great Runes resemble their demigods, I guess.
A war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the Greater Will.
If you are familiar with other FromSoft titles, you would know that the intro cinematic is always reliable.
That's questionable because we were told that the ancient dragons were all destroyed in Dark Souls 1. Though, to be fair, that was kind of more of an issue of translation. It's just kind of funny. And then there's a lot to be said as to whether or not these intro cinematics are meant to tell us a story that is told in their relative universes, or if these are descriptive claims about the world that we will visit. All right, let's go back in.
It's not affected by personal opinions or the lack of knowledge. It basically tells us the state of the world we are in. So the Greater Will only abandoned the lands between due to the actions of the demigods during the Shattering War. I believe this is exactly the point of time where Metyr was abandoned.
And of course, there is the argument to be made that Metyr could have been abandoned before by the Greater Will, and then the Greater Will could have favored the demigods, and then the demigods lost the Greater Will's favor, and now it's our turn. So there are certainly layers of ambiguity stacked on all of this.
After that moment, any communication between Metyr or her two fingers and the Greater Will was severed. The two fingers were basically telling us the last message they received. Kill the demigods deemed unworthy by the Greater Will, and mend.
Wait. So he thinks that Metyr and the High Treason happened before Marika's reign, but then contact was severed with the Shattering. So Metyr was still in contact with the Greater Will even after the assassination attempt. I guess. Okay. I'll try to buy it.
The Elden Ring. But when new information came to them, they simply didn't know what to do. I am talking about burning the Erdtree. Radagon sealed the entrance, and seeking audience with Queen Marika was impossible. They simply weren't told what to do, so they genuinely tried to communicate with the Greater Will. They weren't faking it. They were simply trying to talk to the boss who already left. Like their mother, they kept waiting until they received another message telling them what to do.
Alright, so this isn't entirely related to the video, but it has me thinking a bit more laterally in that we've watched like 3 videos on the sin, or alleged sin of Marika and whatnot over the past couple nights, and for some reason I still think there's a lot more to do with it in burning the Erdtree, and if the Shadow Tree is kind of fundamentally connected, pun intended I guess, to Radagon through the thorns covering the Erdtree, which need to be burned with the fire of the giants and whatnot, then is that kind of theme present in the DLC as well, where the Shadow Tree and its thorny structure needs to have been burned, or was it burned in the past to kind of create that situation? And does that all tie into the cardinal sin? Or let's say original sin, I guess, even though I tend to think that there isn't a difference between the first cardinal sin and the quote-unquote original sin. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's a little bit weird for me to think that the original sin is different than the cardinal sin, and that the cardinal sin would kind of be in some aspects greater than the original sin if it's called the first cardinal sin, because wouldn't the first sin be kind of cardinal in its nature? Anyway.
And this is the biggest difference between the fingers and the Elden Beast. As we already established, the Elden Beast was sent after Metyr as a superior being with a different job title. The Elden Beast was the Elden Ring itself and the living incarnation of order. A very subtle but huge difference between Metyr and the Elden Beast is their fingers. Fitting, right? The Elden Beast has 5 fingers, while Metyr has only 4. At first, it may seem like nothing, but in matter of fact, it's incredibly important. In the base game, we can find a dagger called Cinqueda. The dagger description reads as follows. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. We can learn from the description that the 5 fingers represent intelligence.
And there is a bit of a discrepancy with that text in the Japanese, which says that it represents 5. Hold on, let me look at it again. I know I've made a short video on this way back in the day. Oh yeah, this is this is a huge difference, and I guess the DLC doesn't really help us read into this more, and it might make it sound a bit less likely after all. So anyway, it says in the past the intelligence which was conferred to the beasts, hold on, is represented in the 5 fingers symbolizing the dagger, essentially. So the 5 fingers here don't necessarily have to be a beast's 5 fingers. It could just literally be a 5 finger, which, you know, since we had 2 fingers, that really brought up questions as to whether or not 2 plus 3 equals 5, or whether or not there's just a 5 finger thing that was different than the 2 and the 3 fingers. So I guess it does really suck that we don't get any more indications of the 5 fingers beyond like the Elden Beast. But anyway, just wanted to bring that up to support our guy's point here a little bit. Yeah, Corn said you can't imagine anyone writing about a first sin would then consider a different sin to be the first cardinal sin. Yeah, I'm going to probably have to use that as ammo for my arguments. And then you also said in Judeo-Christianity, the first sin would absolutely be considered the first cardinal sin. Okay, that's what I think. And then, okay, Hilko was saying the cardinal sin is one that can still be committed. The original sin is an established term for the sin we inherited from our forefathers, or rather Eve, of course. Right, and so, like I said before, well, I guess I didn't really say it this stream, but one of the issues is original sin doesn't use the Christian terminology, if I remember correctly, in the DLC at all. It's more like the sin of the beginning, which, or the beginning sin, essentially, whether you want to call that original sin or something else, is debatable. So I don't know how fair it is to compare that aspect of Christianity's original sin to like the cardinal sin of Elden Ring and burning the Erdtree. The terms are used in English in a setting that is clearly centered around Christianity, although multiple meanings by design would be brilliant. The original sin was the first cardinal sin, though, you guess? Okay, you withdraw your claim for now? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I could double check it now, but I don't think it's going to change too much. But maybe I'll do it off on the side.
I believe this is the biggest difference between the Elden Beast and Metyr. The Elden Beast is intelligent. He can make decisions on his own according to the rules set by the Greater Will. Unlike Metyr, who can only wait for clear instructions from the Greater Will. This may explain why the Elden Beast took the decision to punish Marika for shattering the Elden Ring, yet not killing her, as she remains a god in truth.
Alright, so I screwed up because I was not paying enough attention to this, but I did look it up, and apparently the term Genzai, as in like the Christianity term for original sin, which is also used on the Dark Souls 2 title, Scholar of the First Sin. It's like Scholar of Original Sin, which, you know, makes it sound like a bit of a different game. But anyway, Genzai does not appear in the base game, nor does it appear in the DLC. So instead, you just have Hajimari no Sumi. Hajimari no Sumi, which is like the first or beginning sin. So hopefully that clarifies things. And then Korn says, again, though, if it's referring to the first sin as primal original sin, it wouldn't make sense to not have that lead to all other sins as a consequence. Exactly. Jameson said, original sin is what we're all born with because we were born imperfect. Adam and Eve were just a story and not actual events of the fall of man. It's arguable. And then Tony, nice to see you again. Oh, no, you were here earlier. You think it could be somewhat comparable in the sense of Marika's ascension to godhood being related to both? Maybe the snake stuff and the cardinal sin of burning the Erdtree. Right. So it depends on where you want to look at the beginning from. So if you say that Marika's ascension is like the birth of a god, and that's kind of equivalent to Adam and Eve understanding the differences between good and evil and whatnot, and calling that their birth of like having the knowledge of God, then I could kind of see what you mean by that. But I still don't think that meshes super well with how we're told that burning the Erdtree was the first cardinal sin. And if we back that up further, it could tie into the potential idea that Marika and her forces could have burned a pre-existing tree that would go on to become the Erdtree for whatever reason, and that would tie into the concept of original sin, because they're burning the Erdtree in a sense, but from the burned ashes of that Erdtree, they go on to grow a new one, because it's kind of like a pyrophytic organism, perhaps. That's the problem with it biblically. You shared some stuff in Discord that you think's relevant. Yeah, I saw the ping. Thank you. And then Global says, there's some Eden symbology in the snake being near the Headless Mother statue in Bonnie Village. Yes. All right. So let me... I know I backed up a little bit, but I just want to make sure. All right. So I definitely remember the Cinque Dea.
Is the biggest difference between the Elden Beast and Metyr. The Elden Beast is intelligent. He can make decisions on his own according to the rules set by the Greater Will. Unlike Metyr, who can only wait for clear instructions from the Greater Will. This may explain why the Elden Beast took the decision to punish Marika for shattering the Elden Ring, yet not killing her as she remains a god in truth.
I was actually just wondering who would win between Metyr and the Elden Beast. So I think Metyr scales higher, and it looked like the Elden Beast had just died. So DLC scaling, rip.
To punish Marika for shattering the Elden Ring, yet not killing her as she remains a god in truth, according to Enya. This also explains why the Elden Beast attacks us after we defeat Radagon. I believe most people get this part wrong. The Elden Beast doesn't actually care about the Golden Order. Like the Greater Will, he just wants order. I also believe the Elden Beast isn't dead. It's a part of him to defend the Elden Ring. That's why he starts the fight with us. You must defeat the Elden Beast to prove you are worthy of becoming the Elden Lord. As Godfrey said, a crown is warranted by strength. So the Elden Beast stands to us, and if we can defeat him, then he reverts back to the Elden Ring and you are worthy of obtaining the ring. Now for the final question, why did Ymir lie to us about Metyr being unhinged from the very start? This is easily explained from his backstory. Ymir is delusional. He wants to become the Mother of Fingers instead of Metyr. His backstory is a rather tragic one. Behind the cathedral of Manus Metyr, we can find a graveyard. We can interact with one of the tombs to receive a message. Yori, beloved child, taken before his time. Yori is Ymir's son. He died in a young age. During our first encounter with Ymir, he tells us at the end to mind our feet around the church, as we wouldn't want to hurt the little boy. But what little boy? His child is dead.
That dialogue unhinged me. I was like, what am I looking for? So I spent probably like 20 minutes just rambling around the church looking for something and like rolling into the walls, and there is nothing. So anyway, Shadow, welcome into this stream. You thought Marika was the Elden Beast because Roderica tells us to kill the god Marika, and it's kind of weird if that goes unresolved. You don't know. So about that, I definitely see the appeal in tying the two together, but I think some complications arise with how we're told that the Elden Beast landed in, or rather arrived in the lands between through the golden starred meteor, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think that's supposed to be an explicit reference to Marika, especially now with the DLC tying her to the shaman village. So I do think there's the possibility that the Elden Beast could have subsumed part of Marika and or Radagon's identities to have like gained a form of divinity, but I don't really know where the boundaries between the three of them lie. And then Without Horn says, isn't there an NPC we can kill called Yuri, or is that in Bloodborne? So you might be thinking of Yuria, which is a pretty common name for the FromSoft games. So there was a Yuria in Demon Souls. There was kind of a Yulia in Dark Souls 1 as like an invisible cat, I guess, with that first undead merchant in the Burg. And then just Carla in Dark Souls 3. I don't think we had a Yuria in Dark Souls 3. No, yeah, we did. Yuria of Londor. I tend to confuse the two because of their names. So yeah, there's Yuria of Londor in Dark Souls 3, but not Bloodborne.
After sounding the first bell and going back to him, we can find him holding a little finger creeper in his arms. This must be the little boy he was talking about. Losing his little boy broke his mind. He was trying to rebirth him. After that encounter, we can find him standing in front of the grave saying the following.
Forgive me. I failed you. Failed to birth you whole. I was not ready to be your mother, but I can still stay here. Nice and close. For now, my dear. Sleep soundly.
It's clear now what's going on. He failed to bring back his child and ended up with that finger creeper. But in his mind he can do it properly, only if he can replace Metyr as the mother of fingers.
The fact that you can alter his garb to get this is just top tier character design.
That's why he lied to us to push us to kill Metyr for him. Then after the task is done, he attacks us alongside his knight. His dialogue gives even more context.
My shining star, grant me a mother's strength. Look here at my fingers. I will be the true mother, and I will be the only mother.
The backstory of Emir is a rather tragic one, yet it doesn't justify his lies. The lies that caused a lot of confusion in the lore community. Hopefully we cleared some.
And to build off some of his points right here, I think another reason to not trust Ymir is that he's very willing to deceive others to accomplish his goals, it seems, with his Swords of the Knights, Yolan and Anna, in that he literally has a puppet of one of them that the other is oblivious to, and will use that to attack the player for whatever reason. So if he's willing to lie to Yolan about Anna, then who's to say that he's not lying to us about anything else? Especially when he does seem deluded from the start.
Some of that. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button and tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Until next video, farewell, fellow tarnished.
Alright, so, oh damn it.
with
Yeah,
the release.
that was a pretty good video. So even though Korn's like, oh no, not this guy. I mean, that was pretty decent. Obviously, actually, there really weren't too many big leaps for the most part. Other than just trying to place things a bit definitively, but yeah, it really sucks trying to fit Metyr into the timeline, especially with like the Nox treason. But anyway, so as far as all the Bible talk goes, I do like to facilitate discussion that's being done respectfully, which you guys have been doing, don't get me wrong. However, I would like to caution against taking hardline stances against others and about what the so-called proper interpretations of the Bible or any work should be, because it can quickly devolve into a spot where people don't really engage in the discussions in a good faith manner, and they just kind of end up quibbling or arguing over the minutia rather than building off of each other into something greater. So you're fine, Tony. I just want to reiterate that for some people who are newer. Okay, so yeah, I've gone ahead and shared this video with you guys, and I want to check out his other stuff. I don't remember if I've watched anything else by him. Maybe there's something. Godfrey's Origins and Crownings revealed. That sounds interesting enough. How did Mesmer and Melina end up like this? And this seems interesting enough that... Oh, right. So he was the Griffith dude. That explains it. Oh, I am subscribed. Okay, well, that solves that problem. All right, so let's go ahead and check out the next video. I forgot. Negative Shadow of the Erdtree review by Ratatosker. So,
hey all,
this is going to be pretty interesting to me because I know that Ratatosker is a complainer, kind of in a similar way that I am pretty critical of things. He and I had really different takes on Lords of the Fallen, so I'm very curious to see what he says about Shadow of the Erdtree, because I guess I haven't really watched a lot of creators talk about it other than what I've watched on stream. So yeah, let's see where this goes.
This is Ratatosker, and this is my mostly negative review for Shadow of the Erdtree.
And I gotta respect him for putting it all out there like that. So maybe he'll have gotten a lot less hate than I did for, saying I played without Skidoo blessings, but we'll see.
And it's mostly negative not because I have mostly negative things to say about Shadow of the Erdtree, it's mostly negative because I mostly want to talk about negative things. The virtues enjoyed by Shadow of the Erdtree are easy to understand and easy to find, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people talking about them for a long time, myself included. The purpose of this video, though, is to talk about the negatives and talk about what I think they did poorly and might improve. My overall impression for those interested in it is that this is a fantastic DLC. 9.9 out of 10.
I think that is way too high, to be honest. Obviously, well, I guess this isn't obvious. So I don't remember how much I even break it down in any of my review videos, but as I do say that when I rate my games, I tend to rate them on what I call a bell curve. And this isn't like a weighted bell curve that's kind of relative to the games. I just think of what I would consider to be a... Where is my picture? No, it'd be in this folder, wouldn't it? No, not this folder at all. Bell. All right. So the way that I would rate games is on a bell curve with perfection representing a 10, which I just kind of don't think is feasible as a rule. And so essentially 10s don't exist, because to me a perfect 10 would be a game which I would literally be able to find no flaws or any ways that I even think it could be improved. So this kind of unattainable, and then it puts 5 at like the perfect middle point between like good and bad. So for me, an average game is a game that is fun and is enjoyable. It doesn't have any bugs to like detract from it and make it become more flawed, but it's not necessarily compelling. And if I were to talk to somebody in a random conversation, I would not be inclined to necessarily recommend this game out of the blue. but games that are 4 and below, I think, are flawed or predatory towards the player. So for me, any gacha game is automatically almost like a 3 at a baseline, and it's either better or worse because of that. And I just hate gachas enough that I don't think I would ever recommend one to anybody. So anyway, moving on from the whole gacha thing, games that are like terribly flawed would be easy to consider, like Superman 64, where it's like non-functional, or if they just have like game-breaking bugs or performance issues which render the game unplayable or unfinishable. Things like that really bring games down to me. And then games that are better than that are ones that I enjoy quite a bit, into like orders of magnitude above other games for each scale. So to give a bit of a more tangible example of what I would consider to be like an average 5 out of 10 game, one that I could spend a lot of hours into if I really enjoyed it, but it's just, fluff, would be a game like Dynasty Warriors or like Warriors Orochi, because to me they are perfectly functional games. You know exactly what the hell you're getting when you see the Dynasty Warriors title, and it's like some of them are better than others, don't get me wrong, but a Dynasty Warriors game is a Dynasty Warriors game, and you either get it or you don't. And so for me, like some of the games which approach perfection tend to be games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, because there's very little in that game which I think can be meaningfully improved other than some like customizable type stuff and the online netcode. But other stuff that reaches this level for me would be the original games of Final Fantasy VII and Suikoden 2, just because of their narratives and the kind of influence that they had on me, even though they weren't necessarily perfect games, or even games that I may not have sunk like 1,000 hours into. They're just that good that they just kind of stand out and like leave that kind of impression. So you used to love Dynasty Warriors? Yeah. They're fun games if that's like what you're into, or if you're fine with it. So I think another maybe a 9 out of 10 game would be something like Vampire Survivors. And that's like a more recent example because it's just done extremely well. It is so fun. There's low commitments. And if anyone is like, oh, I don't know how to play, I think Vampire Survivors would probably be something that I would just offer up quite readily. So hopefully that explains some of my thoughts about that. And so for me, putting Shadow of the Erdtree on this scale, I definitely think it's way higher than a 5. I had a lot of fun playing it, especially on a first playthrough. Like for me, exploration was almost like a 9. A general gameplay is about an 8, and then repeated playthroughs kind of always bring the Elden Ring stuff down for me, like more towards a 7. So I think more realistically, I would say that if they touched up the bosses and made things better, I would give it an 8 for a first playthrough, and then subsequent ones like a 7. So that's just kind of where I am with the Shadow of the Erdtree scaling. So to give it a 9.9 implies that it has virtually no issues to me, which I just cannot buy into. But of course, that's just my rating compared to others, which I know virtually nobody uses this system, but it's so good. I wish more people used this system. Yeah, Stella says Vampire Survivors could easily be made financially exploitable, and it isn't, which is a whole point in itself. Yeah, just imagine porting that to mobile. You would make bank. Corn says, a 9 out of 10 game for you is a game that makes you keep wanting to play every day for over 2.5 years. So Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild. Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fair as well. Like, but as I've thought about the whole concept of gaming more over the past couple years as I've made this channel, I've come to realize that the amount of hours that I sink into a game don't always correlate with my actual enjoyment of that game. So I think a couple good examples for that would be something like Destiny 2 or Path of Exile. I particularly enjoy playing those games. I do think they have really fun core feedback loops, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend other people play them, especially not at the same level that I would recommend people check out a FromSoft game like Elden Ring or Bloodborne or Vampire Survivors, Smash Bros. Ultimate. So I would probably be like putting that at the 6 or 7 category. Although it depends on like the content that comes out and like where the actual game states are. And then Corn says, to be fair, you do not consider yourself a gamer. That's fair. And what would I rate the base game? I would probably say the same thing, where if you really like exploration, I would give it a 9, like a low 9, like slightly above the 8, kind of 9. But when you play it more, like a second playthrough, I'd give it an 8. And then anything beyond that, I'd probably lean more towards a 7 for the base game. And so I would just kind of give Shadow of the Erdtree an 8, because the bosses are kind of garbage and really detracts. And then a 7, or even maybe as low as a 6 on additional repeated playthroughs, because it's kind of, I don't want to say like barren, but maybe Ratatoskr will talk about it. So yeah, anyway, now having gone on that soapbox tangent, let's go back into the video.
I think it's possible that this is the best DLC ever made by human hands. In fact, in terms of size, scale, and quality, it's hard to even call it a DLC. It strays far from what that title typically implies, having more in common with sequels than normal DLCs. Shadow of the Erdtree left me completely satisfied, and any criticism I might levy in this video should be viewed with the understanding that I believe this expansion should qualify for Game of the Year, and in fact should probably win.
Maybe. I would have to double check all the games that came out this year. I guess I don't really play a ton of titles every year, or like not new titles. Anyway.
Alright, the first thing I want to talk about is the Shadow Tree Blessing system. The Shadow Tree Blessings are a new leveling system introduced for Shadow of the Erdtree that only works in the Shadow of the Erdtree area. The system is simple. As you upgrade it, enemies will deal less damage and you will deal more damage to them. And the amount that the Shadow Tree Blessing gives you is huge, much more than you could get through traditional leveling and other ways of increasing your damage or mitigating the damage taken. Overall, I think this is a fantastic system and I'm glad that they implemented it, but I have a couple of criticisms on how it was done. For context though, let's talk about why I think it's a good idea in general.
So before Ratatoskr influences my views, I guess I'll share my opinion, which I guess I don't really have entirely strong opinions about the Shadow Tree Blessings, other than I think it's really smart that they tried to do something to scale the DLC in a certain direction, so that way people could continue to feel a sense of progression, even with their characters that were like level 500. I don't know whether I wanted more blessings or less in regard to how they affected the power level of the game, or maybe I should say redundancy in the blessings. So you run into the problem where if you explore a ton, you can inadvertently kind of overlevel certain content, although it is a little bit rare, I suppose, versus being perpetually underleveled for not exploring enough. And I don't know what the proper balance between them would be. I was wondering whether or not they're going to hard cap player health, FP, or endurance, kind of like the fetid, rotted, cursed chalice dungeons in Bloodborne. And so with them kind of artificially raising stats to a certain degree, it's a certain choice, but I feel like the biggest problem with the Shadow Tree Blessings and the DLC in general is just like the point in which it's placed in relation to the rest of the game. But I really don't know the best solution for that by any means. So I guess I just kind of have mixed to ambivalent feelings, really. Get wrecked, Tony. Drew said, it is weird they didn't have redundant Shadow Tree fragments after all those golden seeds. Yeah. Korn thinks it would have been cooler to tie the power level increase to defeating bosses. Yeah, that's a good point as well, but they made it clear the exploration was a continued theme from the base game that they wanted. Maybe like a little bit of both, or having more things. More stuff for Torrent. I guess like a lot of my complaints aren't necessarily about the blessings as much as they are the fact that a lot of the enemies, more specifically the bosses in the DLC, seem to have exponentially scaling power, whereas we did not. And what I mean by that is they had a lot longer combo chains, they were more aggressive, but like we didn't really get any new buffs that lasted longer, so it just, I don't know, it just became a little bit frenetic, the pace with some of these things. Pixie said Sekiro had it from the bosses, and that made the game very hard. That's true, but at least like Sekiro became more of a dance. I do think Sekiro is a lot better balanced in that regard, but I also think Sekiro is a harder game, but it was just kind of, combat was better in some ways. Anyway.
I had a problem with FromSoft DLCs for a long time, and it was specifically that there was no sense of progression. The DLCs were harder than the base game, and they were tailored for endgame level characters. And they made no attempt to replicate the feeling of getting stronger that you felt in the base game. And I've always thought that was a mistake. The feeling of progression is one of the reasons why Souls games are so fun. It's not the only reason that they're fun, it's also fun to actually just be strong, to get to the point where you're strong and then be happy with it.
Did I watch this? That last bit sounded familiar.
But in my opinion, it's better to have both, and previous DLCs didn't have both. Your weapon is as upgraded as it's gonna get. You can still level up, but the damage and the health that you get hits soft caps, and so their effect is minimal. And I felt this was going to be a particularly significant problem for Elden Ring, because very early on in Elden Ring they pushed the idea that you didn't have to fight everything that you saw. You could go off, gain levels, gain upgrades, and come back when you were stronger. And without an alternate upgrade system, it would be hard for the DLC to replicate that experience.
So thinking about it now, I wonder how it would have worked if they had localized Erdtree blessings, where you can pick up like maybe 5 in a given area to get up to like 100% power, and if that could have been a better implementation of the feature, but I don't know.
And so I was very happy with the interview where Miyazaki announced the Erdtree blessings, because he cited my concerns specifically as the reason for its implementation. He views the ability of getting stuck on a boss and being able to go elsewhere to get stronger as a good thing, as something that needs to be able to be experienced by people that are already at endgame, that are at level 400, it doesn't matter. He wants you to have the ability to feel that feeling. He sees it as giving something to people, something valuable, when he takes away their level 400 overpowered character's ability to steamroll through the DLC.
And I haven't really talked about this, but this is actually a really big part of why I wanted to go through the entire DLC while being under-leveled with this, at least in reference to the Erdtree blessings, because he made it sound like the challenge of fighting the bosses without them was going to be more fun, but it kind of wasn't for me, at least. For many of the bosses, anyway.
Now, for me, I was very satisfied with how the system worked, but I have 2 criticisms for it. First of all, there's not enough Erdtree blessings littered around. It takes 50 Erdtree blessings to upgrade your thing to the max, and there are only 50 in the DLC. I don't think it should work this way. I think it should work how the golden seeds do in the base game. In the base game, you only need 30 golden seeds to upgrade your flask all the way. But in total, the game has 41, so if you miss some, you still can get to the max upgrade level. I believe it was a mistake to not have at least 20 more. There have been a lot of complaints regarding the game's difficulty, and some of those might have been mitigated had the Erdtree fragments been more plentiful. And I think to some degree FromSoft understands this, because they released a patch that increased the effectiveness of Erdtree blessings. It was an across-the-board buff with the biggest increases happening at the lower levels. And my problem with it is that it's a less elegant solution than just adding more Erdtree fragments and ultimately achieves the same result. It's the same thing. So let's say that you're post-patch and you're at Shadow Tree Blessing 5. Well, that gives you about a 35% damage increase. And it takes about 11 Shadow Tree fragments to get there. Well, before the patch, you would have had to have been at Shadow Tree Fragment 7 to have that same damage buff, which means you would have needed 15 fragments. It would have been a more elegant solution had they initially, before the game came out, thought to simply make the fragments more plentiful. One of the
He's not wrong, but it's a lot easier of a fix to just adjust some numbers on a couple cells and call it a day. Let's be real. But I definitely agree with that so far.
criticisms I've heard from other people about Elden Ring is that they didn't feel sufficiently rewarded for things. That's almost certainly not the case with Shadow Tree fragments, though, so having an extra 20 lying around in different places of importance would have surely lessened those people's complaints.
And that might be true as well, and it could also have made re-exploring the Shadowlands feel a lot smoother, rather than having to go get each specific one. Maybe it would have been more people's alleys to go to specific locations rather than having to go literally everywhere in the Land of Shadow.
They would have rather found another fragment than, say, a cookbook. Although I don't agree with them, I actually like the cookbooks quite a bit. Now, the second issue I have with the fragments is more philosophical. The fragments are a reward for carefully exploring, and their intended purpose is to give the player a way to upgrade themselves by going off and doing something else. It's supposed to simulate what you could do in the base game. But they don't actually simulate what you could do in the base game because they work very differently. In the base game, what you would do to get stronger is go off, get souls, find upgrade materials, and increase your strength that way.
If you found the right upgrade materials. Yeah, they really haven't learned that lesson yet, that redundancy is better for a lot of this stuff, because it really sucks if you have the tier 4 smithing stones, but you need tier 3 to upgrade your weapon, and you don't have any of those.
But that happens no matter what you do. It's not something you can miss. You can't fail to find a Somber Smithing Stone 8, and then have that mean that you never get to the maximum upgrade level of your weapon. And you get souls and upgrade materials no matter what it is that you're doing. You could be tackling legacy dungeons, you could be doing the mini dungeons or the caves. Regardless of what you do, you're going to find upgrade materials and souls, which are the primary method of getting stronger. You can't fail at trying to get stronger in the base game, but you can fail at trying to get stronger in the DLC. And even if you don't miss them, even if you find all of
I'm not so sure about that, but I'm curious how he's going to build on this point. Paisan says, after the patch, you only need 12 blessings for the whole DLC. Is it really that big? I didn't think the chart showed that. So where are we at? 657? So 12 is 1.6, 1.85 versus 17. I could see what you mean by that, because wasn't the recommendation for Radon 16 originally?
it's the same thing.
This is 657. 12 is a soft cap of sorts. Okay.
Stronger in the base game, but you can fail at trying to get stronger in the DLC. And even if you don't miss them, even if you find all of them or most of them, the Shadow Tree fragments force you to engage with the exploration in a weird and unnatural way. You're encouraged to scrounge around and really comb an area. And that's not good. Remember, the purpose of the Shadow Tree fragments is to give you a way to get stronger, to face a boss if you get stuck with it. You get stuck at a boss, you go elsewhere, you find fragments, you can go back and tackle that boss.
Right, so he might be right about this, and this will just be one of those issues where my natural playstyle is to overexplore things, so it's hard for me to understand how well this represents other people's experiences going through the DLC.
But since many of them are obscure, missable, and limited in nature, you are compelled to comb an area in a way that you might not otherwise have done. And not everybody likes to do that. I do that anyway, but not everybody wants to do that. And it by default...
I just don't remember how many of the blessings are super hidden, except for, I think there's like a couple enemies you kill in a few locations that can drop them. Like the pot boy next to the curse boy in Morth Ruins, I think has one. Or maybe there's another pot boy in the Rao Ruins that just randomly has one.
Will make the exploration aspect of the DLC less enjoyable than it was in the base game, because the connection between upgrade and exploration was looser. Now, the thing is, I support the Shadow Tree Fragment upgrade system. I support the reason why they were implemented, and I think it was actually pretty good. It's better to have had them than not to have had them. All future DLCs that FromSoft makes, I believe, should have a progression system attached to them. Something that will try and simulate the experience of having gone through the game your first time through. But I would...
So Korn is saying 4 different hippos, 5 after you kill Gaius. Honestly, those ones don't concern me pretty much at all, because the hippos at least are mini bosses, and it kind of makes sense that if you fight a mini boss, you'll get rewarded for it. And the fact that there were 5 after Gaius did feel a little bit over the top, especially considering how rare they were in the rest of the game. But maybe they would not have felt as rare if there were more blessings elsewhere. So I just meant like the things that people are really likely to miss. I don't think people are going to miss the hippos unless it's done willfully, versus just a random pot guy.
Wouldn't want that system to be exactly like the Shadow Tree blessings. There's room for improvement, either by making the fragments far more plentiful, or scrapping the system entirely and thinking up a more elegant solution. Alright, let's talk about my second criticism, the big criticism, the last boss. If you didn't see a spoiler warning up until this point, now's your chance to leave. This is not a spoiler-free video. The last boss is Radahn, and a lot of people are unhappy with Radahn being the final boss. There's people that are unhappy with him mechanically, as a boss. There's people that think that the fight is too much, it's too difficult, disorienting. But apart from those, there are people unhappy with the story ending with Radahn as the final boss. There are people...
So I'm not as upset about the story. The only reason why I'm disappointed about it as far as the story goes is because I think it could have just been done better. And I would have liked more foreshadowing about the Shadow of the Erdtree's lore in the base game, or at least even more throughout leading up until the story. Like, I really enjoyed the bits of dialogue with Ansbach talking about Mikola being like the most terrifying. That is like peak Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree lore for me. But yeah, mechanically, I was not a fan of this fight for a number of reasons, which, you know, everybody tends to feel a little bit differently about that. Too much laser show? Yeah. So, anyway.
People that will go so far as to speculate that the initial story planned Godwyn to be Mikola's consort, and it was changed to Radahn for some reason. The basis of the speculation is that there are numerous item descriptions tying Godwyn to Mikola. The Golden Epitaph sword has Mikola referring to Godwyn as Lord Brother. And Lord...
Now, this makes me wonder if I should always point to Mikola and Radahn as one of those red herring moments where people thought there was going to be the Godwyn connection, even though I didn't think that. And then we just got Radahn instead. Damn, it's such low-hanging fruit. I guess I'm going to have to use it. Hey, Vorb, nice to see you again.
Lord Brother is how he refers to Radahn in the memory cutscene at the end. The sword also has Mikola wishing that Godwyn would die a true death, which could be similar to how he needed Radahn to die so he could bring his soul back in Mohg's body. There's also that Mohg calls his coming dynasty the Mohgwyn dynasty, which has the words Mohg and Gwyn in it. Now, before I get to my criticism, I want to make sure that it's understood that these two are not the criticisms that I hold. I don't think the fight is too hard or unfair, and I don't think having Radahn at the end is a retcon, or that Radahn took the place that Godwyn was supposed to be in. I think it's possible that if we look at previous lore points and the new stuff introduced in Shadow of the Erdtree, the connection between Radahn and Mikola might make more sense. But there is still a problem, and I think it's the real reason why people are dissatisfied with the ending. And it's that having Radahn as the final boss is more confusing than it is satisfying. So, for example, let's assume that I'm right, and that after some time has passed and we look into the lore and speculation becomes more refined.
You know what? I think I might have actually watched this video right when I'd finished the DLC. That'll be really funny, especially if I were to ever like go back and compare my reaction then to now.
We discover that the connection between Radahn and Miquella makes perfect sense. Let's assume the best case scenario. And if we dig deep into the lore, we find that it's actually completely satisfying after the fact. Well, in that case, that still doesn't really help us during the fight. It doesn't help us in the short term. It doesn't matter that it was hinted at for a tiny amount of time in the DLC. It doesn't help the situation that Ansbach and Freya's questline lets you know about it beforehand. None of those factors make it seem less stupid when you first hear about it.
Yeah, I remember this
Confusion
part
and
now.
displeasure is not what the revelation of the final boss should be inspiring in people during the boss fight. Let me give you an example. In Dark Souls 3, Soul of Cinder. Soul of Cinder had presentation. And you don't have to be very well versed in the lore. You don't have to go around reading every single item description to understand what Soul of Cinder represents. As you fight him, he switches forms, changing his playstyle, and in many ways moving very much like a player. And as the fight goes on, you realize what he's supposed to be. You realize what he represents. He's you. He's a representation of all the people who chose to link the fire. And then when you get him into the final phase, his fighting style changes once more to resemble Gwyn's, the First Lord of Cinder.
Yeah, for as much as problems that Dark Souls 3 kind of had with the lore in tying into the previous games, you gotta admit that that's a pretty peak moment to have the Gwyn theme just play with the Soul of Cinder, Avatar of Fire boss music.
It's an impactful moment, and it's something you can easily understand even if you don't understand the story, even if you're only partially paying attention to what's happening in the item descriptions and the lore.
And the fact that he just double hands the greatsword, it just, yep, such a great reference.
From Software is very good at this. They've done it well with many different bosses throughout the years. But Radahn is an unfortunate exception. The reaction I am seeing from people when they see Radahn is confusion and displeasure. And almost all the relevant lore details that would ease the shock aren't accessible until after the boss fight. The Remembrance tells us the reason why Miquella wanted Radahn as a consort. And the armor item description reveals to us finally what Melania said to Radahn during their battle in Caelid, and it helps explain what Melania was doing in Caelid warring with Radahn in the first place, which was a big mystery in the base game. But again, this is all stuff that you don't get until after you beat the boss fight. It's information that will do nothing for you when Radahn is first revealed, or when you are fighting him. And given how difficult he is, that could be quite a while. I think they did a bad job with how Radahn was introduced in the DLC. You can tell by how many people are complaining about it, but not just anybody. Even people like me. I'm the biggest Radahn supporter. No one has levied more Melania slander on this earth than I. So if even I am unhappy with Radahn's presentation, then I think it's obvious that there's a problem. Alright, that's the end of
The
the...
global sequence says, doesn't make it any less stupid, is so cathartic to hear. Maybe I should talk more like that in some of my videos. And then Tony's been saying, yes, let's hear all that, or let's keep all of those thoughts at bay. And now you're saying, you get why people might not like it, but the idea of the Elden Ring being an esoteric occult manuscript is apt in your opinion? And then Jake said, Soul of Cinder and Gale were peak. Stella says, Sister Frida having that third health bar and Soul of Cinder doing the attacking like a player, then swapping to Gwyn are two of the coolest boss choices From has ever made in your opinion. Yeah. Once you like finally get over that exaltation of I finally beat Sister Frida, and then Father Ariandel, you get his voice like what does he say? Like from ash to ash ember alighteth, something like that. And then she comes back with some black flames, our true glow-eyed queen, because she's got that purple eye. Oof. I really do enjoy the Sister Frida fight, even with having to deal with Ariandel. When ashes are too a flame alighted. Thank you. So yeah. I guess I must have maybe I didn't watch this video if I didn't like it. No, but I feel like I definitely remember the ending here. Maybe I watched this on my own. So anyway, Yeah, I enjoyed that video by Ratatosker. I've been subbed to his channel for a while. He does cover other stuff than Elden Ring. He's been covering some Zelda hate lately, which has been kind of funny to see the thumbnails pop up on my screen. But yeah, here's the link to his video if you want to give Ratatosker some support for his negativity. I don't know if I watched it on my own, but I also don't remember watching it on stream either, so I don't know what to make other than my memory's going. No, so my memory is kind of weird. Like, I have a really, really good memory, which might sound like a bold-faced lie or bald-faced lie after having pulled this maneuver, but my memory is extremely good for, like, certain things, and it's going to sound tautological, but my memory is good for remembering things that are memorable to me. And this isn't to say that this isn't entirely a memorable video, but I guess when I stream, it tends to be a lot more stream of consciousness rather than reflective and as absorbing as I normally am. And so a lot of things just kind of like go through me, I guess. Whereas when I'm not streaming, I'm a lot more focused and can chunk things really well and keep things kind of categorized, which is like, I mean, you guys tend to see it when I reference item descriptions off the top of my head. I might forget a thing here or there, but I tend to remember like specific phrases, which put me in the right direction. In my defense, I watch a lot of videos. I guess that's true now that you mention it, yeah. I do wish I was a little bit better at remembering who said what, though. Because it does kind of suck to be like, oh, I heard this before, or like, I think this, and it came from somebody else. And it would be nice to give them as much credit as they deserve. Did I do Ratatosker's Demon Souls video on stream? Seriously, PKing? I don't remember. I've watched a lot of videos. Not as many on Demon Souls, but I feel like I might have. I know there's been like one or two that I've watched. Yeah, Humble teaches English Lit. What you teach for class and read on your own register on entirely different levels. Absolutely. Okay. So, okay, Captini wants a bad take on what the Snake Girl mummy in Frida's boss room is. It's Priscilla, bro. It's just Priscilla. It's a effigy of Priscilla. Or the real thing turned into a doll. It's Randy.
Elden Ring has an...
Alright, so yeah, that was a good one by Ratatosker. I need to start doing academic citations of every Elden Ring theory I mentioned during stream. During stream would be impossible. It's hard enough even remembering where things come from with my videos sometimes. Alright, so anyway, this video had been recommended to me a while back with Serlin on design. I don't remember what his background is. Oh man, reading. So anyway, this dude seems to be a game dev of some sort, and the description says Elden Ring's expansion is massive in scope and the bulk of it is pretty amazing. I discussed why the Shadow Tree fragment system is what it is, that's about why the world is the size it is, and other thoughts about the DLC from a game designer's perspective. So this sounds very interesting. Let's go ahead.
Elden Ring has an...
Alright, so Paisan asked if I watched the new Center Tarnished video, by the way. So I've kind of just banned his videos from my channel. I don't think I watched his newest one, but I watched one the other day where he said Marika is the one great, and I was like, this is just trash, essentially. So I don't want to watch any more of his videos, to be frank. Sorry if you enjoy it, but I'm over it.
Elden Ring has an expansion called Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm going to talk about it from a game designer's perspective and go over several of the design decisions in this game and try to explain.
Oh no, hold on.
Elden Ring has an expansion.
Oh no, the audio's desynced. That's like the worst.
Called Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm going to talk about it from a game designer's perspective and go over several of the design decisions in this game and try to explain them and provide context and tell you what I think worked well and what didn't. And I'm going to do my best to avoid any spoilers. So let's get into it.
He's just very far away. Okay.
I'm not trying to do a traditional review here, but if that's what you're looking for, I'll just throw it in for free because it's super easy for Shadow of the Erdtree. Just ask yourself 2 questions. 1, did you like Elden Ring? And 2, would you be okay with an expansion that's really hard? If the answer is yes to both of those things, then you should buy this expansion, and I think you would really enjoy it. Overall, I think it's really good, maybe even a masterpiece. So yeah, buy it. And as a meta point here, if we take a step back, I think it's worthwhile to buy it just to support FromSoft. FromSoft is a different voice in the game industry. They're really doing things differently than other companies, and I'm glad that they exist and they're out there. So it's nice to support them and make sure that they keep doing it. Just like it's nice to support any indie designers. You wouldn't want Capcom being the only company that made fighting games, for example, so you can check out my fighting game, Fantasy Strike, on Steam and buy the core pack if you like it and want to support the developer, or buy Yomi 2 on Steam, which is a fighting card game. Part 1, Erdtree Fragments.
Oh no, the ironic use of Scadu. Okay, so I guess those are some of the games he's made. I've not heard of either, which isn't necessarily like a criticism or condemnation of our man. It just kind of sucks that, well, I guess it kind of sucks and is awesome that there's just so many games out there now that you can't really stay on top of them, or if you do, it kind of just needs to become a profession, I guess. And yeah.
Let's get into the game design of this expansion. The first thing I want to talk about are the Erdtree fragments. Skippy-Doo, Scatopoo, Scooby-Doo, Erdtree fragments. These things are a bit controversial, so let's talk about what they are exactly and why they exist. These are items that are scattered around the world of the expansion, and you collect them to buff yourself, to buff your attack power and your defense, but they only do that within the realm of the expansion. They don't do anything if you travel back to the base game. There are a total of 50 of these fragments in the expansion, and you need to turn in a few at a time to get an upgrade. You can get a maximum of 20 levels of upgrade. Each level is giving you, well, it was about 4.5% attack power stacking multiplicatively when the game launched, but they adjusted it a little bit so that they are front loading these, and the first few give you more of a bonus than the final few. The math behind these Erdtree fragments gives us a clue as to what the designers were thinking here and what the whole mechanic is for. If you compare the power level of your character right...
So I'm curious, July 1st. I don't remember when that patch was in relation to this, so I wonder if he'll cover it, because yeah, this is very fascinating to think, or to kind of draw these conclusions based off the math. I don't know if his conclusions are going to be accurate or anything like that, but just the idea in and of itself is tantalizing.
When you enter the DLC to later when you have all of the Erdtree fragments and you have a maxed level 20 bonus, your bonus damage is a little bit more than double. And that scale, that progression of going from a certain damage level to a little more and more and more and more until you've more than doubled it, mirrors the progression of damage that you get in the base game when you upgrade your weapons. You can upgrade unique weapons with somber smithing stones up to a level of 10, and you can upgrade the rest of the weapons with regular smithing stones up to a level of 25, but those are comparable to each other. Level 10 in one category is basically the same power level as level 25 in the other, and that is about twice as much damage as if you don't upgrade it, a little bit more. So that's
cool. I didn't realize that. Obviously, I don't look so much at the math side of the game. If you guys caught me crashing in my half-delirious state on the fluid puzzle in Signalis last night, that might elucidate as to why I don't do that. But anyway, this is really cool.
It's a nice clue, but what's really going on here? Why even have this mechanic in the first place? It's a bit weird. It's kind of not what you would expect. So let's think about it for a moment. Let's imagine that the mechanic did not exist at all. So you enter this DLC and you're supposed to have an end game character. You're supposed to be level 150 or so, and you have a solid build. I want to make 2 points about progression here. And the first is very simple. It applies to pretty much any RPG in the genre. It's just the concept that you get more powerful over time as you play through the game. That's how Elden Ring works. That's how all the other FromSoft games work. It's a very normal, standard idea. But the other concept is special to Elden Ring compared to the FromSoft games that came before it. And that is, if you reach a boss and it's difficult, you can just leave, because Elden Ring is an open world. You can go do any number of other things. And in doing those other things, you become more powerful so that you can go back to the boss and you're more powerful and maybe you have a better chance of beating it. So you can kind of self-regulate the difficulty that you are signing up for. This aspect of Elden Ring is, I think, a very key factor to what made it so successful. So back to the expansion, we immediately have a problem if we do not have some sort of new mechanic to handle progression. Because if we just did nothing, then how it would work is you'd fight a boss and it's difficult and maybe you'd leave and go look around, but are you really going to be more powerful? Well, one way that you can be more powerful in the base game and in the expansion is you can level up. But leveling up has diminishing returns, and the expansion starts at about the point where those diminishing returns have really kicked in. So if you fight a boss in the expansion and you have trouble, and so you leave and you manage to level up 5 times and then come back, the difference in your power level there is going to be very small compared to if you did the very same thing in the base game, where those levels are adding more power. Also, there's a concept of leveling up your weapons that I talked about. And
so obviously he hasn't finished his point yet, but there are some caveats here, which even in the DLC, leveling up is extremely important up until you hit those soft cap thresholds. So the difference between playing through the DLC with if you only had 40 vigor, 50 vigor, and 60 vigor is night and day. Even between 50 and 60 is night and day, because you're more liable to be one shot at 50 than 60 from certain enemy attacks. Maybe I'm misremembering, because a lot of my first experience was with without blessings, and that tends to stick out a bit more in my mind. But nonetheless, it's still pretty easy to get comboed into like a 2-hit death, which isn't all that great in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, he's right up until a point, and a lot of that stuff also ties into how much I think the basic stats are weighted. I'm saying this terribly. Like the like the meter stats are like the most important, and from like the DLC perspective. So health scales based off of levels, FP scales best off of levels, and even endurance scales best off of levels. Whereas when you get to the DLC, strength, faith, intelligence, they don't scale as well off of levels as they do in the base game, with the exception of like the stat requirements. Nectarine says any vigor past 35 is overly extravagant. In what, Bloodborne? Not true in Elden Ring, yeah. Playing casually, you want 60 for endgame and DLC. Yeah, I think most players will really want to hit 60, at least by the time of Millennia and the DLC. Yeah, Vorb says one roadblock with low vigor is that you're probably going to get counter hit with the extra instability damage and get one shot even if you wouldn't otherwise. True story. And what else was I going to say about that? What is it about vigor? I guess I'm drawing a blank. Maybe I'll get back to it later. So anyway.
You're expected to have already maxed weapons. So in the base game, maybe you'd leave a boss and then find more smithing stones and level up your weapon, but that's not really a thing in the expansion. You already have the strongest weapons you can have.
And actually, that was one of my criticisms of the DLC, was that if for whatever reason you didn't have all of those bell bearings and all the access to the upgrade materials, it felt really awkward and bad having to upgrade the DLC weapons up to that level. Because it kind of implicitly suggests that people should go to the DLC after burning the Erdtree in Farum Azula to kill the god skins at the very least, like loot the bell bearings there. But anyway, it's a lot of FromSoft's games tend to have their greatest strengths also be their greatest weaknesses, where it's really great exploring the games, but if you don't fully explore, you kind of get boned in Elden Ring, and it sucks. And then it just becomes a bit arbitrary to go back and hit the checklist of those certain items that you need to be able to play the game the way that you want to.
If you fought a boss and then had trouble and then went and looked around and explored and tried to find new things, how else could you become more powerful? Well, you could find new weapons that did different things. You could find new ashes of war to put on those weapons. You could find new pieces of armor. You could find new incantations or sorceries to cast. You could find new talismans. But all of these things run into the same kind of problem where maybe there's some new incantations that are a little more powerful. Maybe there's new talismans that are more powerful. Yeah, okay. But how much more powerful? It's not going to be anywhere near the jump that you were getting in the base game as you progress through it. And by kind of definition about how builds work, like most of these things you find are going to be useless to your build, like literally unusable. Maybe you'll find a sorcery, but you don't have a character that can even really use that sorcery. Or
right. And I think this criticism here kind of speaks back to what Raditz was talking about. Well, he and I both tend to enjoy the cookbooks, even though I never use them. Mr. Serlin brings up the good point that a lot of these things aren't always accessible to all the builds. And so it can be a little bit frustrating if you're not getting more things to augment the build that you're currently running. And that has to be especially true for people who only stick with one weapon and they don't use consumables or spells or anything like that at all, because that means effectively everything that they encounter in the DLC is going to be useless for them.
Ashes of war for weapon types that you aren't using. So I think what must have happened, if we could look into the design room to see the discussions that went on about this, probably somebody suggested, well, shouldn't we have the weapons upgrade past the level that they used to? So the unique weapons were getting up to Somber Smithing Stone level 10, and the other ones were getting to 25. Well, what if in the expansion we let you level up Somber weapons, not just to 10, but all the way to 20, and we let you level up the other type of weapons, not to 25, but all the way to 50, and we could give you over time double the amount of damage over the course of the expansion. And I can just picture Miyazaki thinking about it and then saying that he doesn't like it for a couple reasons. One thing is that even though that may achieve the goal that they want in the expansion, that's going to completely ruin the base game. The base game is already bursting at the seams of how powerful you can get. And if we're allowing you to have double strength weapons and then go back to the base game, it's just totally ridiculous and too much. So we can make those extra weapon upgrades not count in the base game, but that's actually pretty confusing. And also, it's not just attack power that we're concerned with here. We want your defensive power to scale up over the course of playing through the DLC as well. And even if we had more weapon upgrades, then we need a defense thing. So should we add more new pieces of armor that are just straight up more powerful than the old ones and replace all of the old ones? That's a really bad idea, actually. Should we let you level up your old armor? That's not a mechanic that exists in the game, but maybe the expansion could add that, could add a way to level up your armor and make it stronger and give you more defense.
And that is actually a system that I kind of miss from the times of Dark Souls. And I don't know, like, I guess it is kind of a pain in the ass upgrading armor at times, especially for fairly negligible rewards for many of the pieces, but there was a kind of tangibility to it that I distinctly remember in Dark Souls 1 that kind of made me enjoy, or I had more of a connection with the armor that I was using as my weapon, as like part of my equipment load, because of my considerations for weight and rolling and stuff like that, and fashion. So I don't know like the best solution for that, but I don't think having armor upgrades was a particularly bad thing, even though I can see a lot of sense for it being removed in the later games. Paisan went in with a big mix of stats, so you could use anything. You also had all 18 larval tiers for your first run. So yeah, when I did the DLC, I guess I was pretty low leveled for both of them, because I was 125 on my first playthrough without the blessings, and I ended at like 177 or like 180 at the most. And then that's kind of what my stream through mirrored as well for my playthrough. I was, I don't remember what level exactly, like 123, 125, something around there, maybe 130 at the highest. Anyway, so my point is I didn't have access to as many builds because of my setup at the time.
Again, that's going to be confusing if you have a certain piece of armor and its level up doesn't count somewhere else. Plus the part where it would kind of break the base game yet again. So all of this is pointing to what we really need is a completely new type of buff that just does the thing that we want. It makes you more powerful and gives you more defense, and it's so separate from everything else that it obviously applies only in the DLC zone. And I'm sure that idea must have rang a bell in Miyazaki's head and the rest of the designers too, because of Sekiro, another game by FromSoft. In that game, there is such a thing as this blessing that kind of stacks over time, and you get it from beating bosses in that game. But what they want in Elden Ring's expansion is actually the opposite of that. They want you to be able to fight a boss, have difficulty, and then go do non-boss things in order to become more powerful. So it wouldn't actually make sense for the goals of the designers here if the only way to power up was to beat the bosses. I think it would make more sense from the player's point of view if that's how it worked, but that's not what Miyazaki was going for. Even
I think there was a mix, and I think it was good that some of them were mixed, like fighting the hippos gives you the skidoo blessings as well as exploration. I tend to be in favor of that kind of design, and this will harken back to what both myself and Ratatoska were saying, in that I think the DLC would have been improved by having more redundancy in the drops of the blessings.
Even though it is kind of a weird idea to have these Erdtree fragments kind of all over the place, and collecting them and exploring is what powers you up, it really is consistent with how Elden Ring worked overall in the base game. So I see exactly why they did it, and it does make the DLC function. Whereas without this mechanic, it would kind of not work right. I'm well aware of how controversial this mechanic is, but overall, I'm going to give it mostly a thumbs up. I think.
So speaking as somebody who did play without the mechanic my first time through, I honestly really enjoyed myself, with the exception of when I got into boss fights. The enemies in the overworld didn't feel particularly overpowered at all, with the exception of the bosses again, with like the ghost flame dragons and the damn death bright bird kicking my ass. But they didn't feel particularly spongy, and that might have been because I was using a colossal weapon and I was able to stagger things a lot more reliably or stun lock them. So I don't know. I
think it does its job, but there is a caveat here. There's something that I think is very annoying about it. To illustrate what I mean about this annoyance, I'm going to bring up two games, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Donkey Kong Country, both very old games at this point. In Grand Theft Auto 3, they had a feature where there are secret packages hidden around the map, and it's an open world game. It was kind of like the first open world game, and it was huge. Okay.
GTA 3, the first open world game. Yeah, I guess I could kind of see what he means by that. I guess it depends on your definition, but he might not be really wrong. I guess I would have to really go back and examine all that stuff.
Okay, so there's this enormous environment where packages are randomly hidden here and there, and there's 100 of them, so a huge number of them, and it was horribly tedious to deal with because there was no way to track which ones have you found, and like generally where should you look. Whereas Donkey Kong Country is completely the opposite. That game is broken into levels, and within a level there is one very well hidden Donkey Kong coin, and you know if you have it or not. So there's such a thing as like, oh, I don't have the one in this level, let me go look for it. And it's just way less tedious to deal with. So whenever I see a game kind of do the Grand Theft Auto 3 thing where there's a whole bunch of hidden things and no way to track it, I just immediately realize what tedium I'm going to be in for.
So this kind of reminds me that even Super Mario World had a kind of similar feature where each stage had 4 Yoshi coins, and if you pick them all up, you'd get a like 1-up icon, and not icon, but you'd get a 1-up, and then the meter for it would kind of cross out. And if you actually played through the entire game and got all of the Yoshi coins, you'd get a star next to your completion percent in the main menu. The kind of annoying thing about that is that there were 95 stars or 96 and not 100. Anyway, that was kind of enjoyable, and that just made me realize Zelda 1 is open world. I mean, like I said, it kind of depends on what you mean by open world, but it's top down. So anyway, going back to that whole Yoshi coin thing, that was actually one of the biggest things that I wish that they had in the Super Mario Maker games, because they have alternate win conditions for levels, but they don't have one where like exploration is part of the goal. So if there is like a design where it's like, oh, you need all 4 Yoshi coins to win, that'd be really cool. And of course there is the whole thing of like needing to get keys to unlock doors, but it's not quite the same. So anyway.
And that is how the Erdtree fragments work. Now you might say, hold on, what about all the many kinds of collectible things in the base game that are very similar? What about those? Do I have the same complaint about those? And well, not so, I mean, a little bit, but not so much. In the base game, there are sacred tiers, and collecting those makes your potions more powerful over time. But the sacred tiers are all in churches. There's also golden seeds in the base game, and collecting all of those gives you access to a larger and larger quantity of potions. And those golden seeds are all by trees. They're all by glowing Erdtrees or ulcerated tree spirits, which are a little bit harder to find, but there's some kind of theme there. Also, you do not need to find all of the golden seeds in order to reach the maximum upgrade. So if you didn't find those last 2 or 3 ulcerated tree spirits that have the golden seeds, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference in maxing out your potions. But that is not how it works for the Erdtree fragments. You have to find all of them in order to max out that bonus. And they're kind of just randomly anywhere. Sometimes they're at a really obvious point of grace. Sometimes beating a boss gives you one, or it's in front of the boss, or sometimes a random nothing enemy gives you one, or there's one in a cave or something. I know it's very anti-FromSoft that they gave you any way to track anything, but it sure would have been nice, or at least put in some extra ones like they did with Golden Seeds. You don't...
Oh yeah, that's a good point, that there was no tracking of your Skidoo blessings in the DLC. Yeah, I guess that's true. I think even on my like personal playthrough, I might be missing like 2 that I just haven't bothered to go back and get, because I mean I've already killed Radon and everything, but just didn't want to go through the effort of figuring out which 2 specifically I was missing.
Really have to find them all to max it out. It's a minor point, so let's just move on. Part 2, didn't expect nothing, or map design. This is my first of a few negative comments about the game's design, but even before I say it, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not hating on it at all, and again, I kind of said it's a masterpiece and a huge thumbs up, but even something that's very good can have some issues, okay? And one of those issues is how empty this game is. This expansion has several different areas in it, and 3 of these areas, and to avoid spoilers, I'll just kind of vaguely say that 2 of them have to do with fingers, and one of them is quite maddening. Anyway, these 3 areas are just over the top in how barren they are. It's actually weird. And I looked up what other people thought about this, and it's kind of controversial. There's some people who think that it's actually amazing and great because all of those areas have wonderful atmosphere and they give a certain vibe very well. I agree with that. They are a big success on that metric. But This is also a game, and there's supposed to be things to explore and things to do. And these 3 particular areas feel just incredibly empty, like it wasn't finished or something. And many other.
So the messed up thing is I don't know which areas he's referring to specifically, with the exception of the Abyssal Woods. So we've got 2 other areas which seem extremely empty. He said some of them are related to fingers. So I guess that's at least 2. But I know a lot of people don't particularly like the Cerulean Coast or Karo's Grave because of how big and kind of empty they are, which I can definitely understand those points. But at least those ones have more atmospherics going for it. I was certainly disappointed with a lot of the finger ruins for as large as they were. I think I would have accepted them a bit more if we didn't have the rebirthing monument allowing us to summon things. It's like, oh my god, there's going to be a big ass boss here. It's going to kick my ass. I'm excited. And then nothing happened. And then I explored the next area in the Jagged Peak region, and then there was nothing there except for the finger. What are they called? The Finger Ascetic Hut, whatever it is. The Finger Hut Junior, where you picked up the one recipe book and there were a couple bears and there's nothing there. There's no fast travel spot. It was a real pain in the ass to go back and explore there because I felt like I must have missed something hours after that fact, but nope, there was actually nothing. So the DLC is kind of like in a weird spot in some ways where it really does have some great atmospherics, but like I was saying earlier, I think the more you play through it and realize that you don't really need to go everywhere, the more empty or the more linear it ends up feeling. And then Vorb said the fog effects and lighting changes when you enter the finger ruins is a little jarring on the PS5. Interesting. Hard to see during some parts of the day. I don't remember that on the PS5. I know Bonnie Village and the Snake Skin can get kind of hard to see unless you're there at night because of the day effects, which is not what one would expect. Anyway. Wang thought the fingers were disappointing. Forbes said the finger ruins and Abyssal Woods are both disappointing after the initial discovery. And yeah, Jagged Peak is a little barren. The Cerulean Coast doesn't have much, but the finger ruins and woods are the worst offenders. Still amazing by default, but still flawed. And so, as I've been saying on not this stream, but in general about the DLC, I think a lot of these so-called emptier places would have been serviced a lot better had they had something like the equivalent of nomadic merchants. And of course we have the forager broods, but they don't talk, they don't say anything, they don't really give us more of a connection to the Shadowlands, and all we have are Miquella's crew, and they all die at the end of the DLC, so it makes an already barren world feel even more empty and devoid of life in many regards. Paisan's very conflicted because the environmental storytelling is solid in all these areas, but there's definitely should have been something. Yeah. Corn thinks it was purposeful for the atmosphere, but you don't know if it was worth it since people are clearly more disappointed in emptiness than appreciating the atmosphere. So I guess I'm one of those weirdos where I like places like the Tomb of the Fallen Giants in Dark Souls 1, and I mean, unironically, I actually like it. I'm not just saying that to be like contrarian. I also liked the Abyssal Woods, with the caveat that I think you should have been able to ride Torrent after defeating Midra, and it's kind of criminal that they didn't allow that to happen. But, well, I really did like the atmospherics of the Cerulean Coast and Karo's Hidden Grave. They just ended up a bit too empty, and I'm not really excited to go back and go through those areas on subsequent playthroughs, other than be like, hell yeah, this area is pretty. That's pretty much it. Like, there's really not much incentive to go that way unless you're like going out of the way to pick up your fragments. You didn't find the hat I mentioned until New Game Plus 3? Oh, are you talking about the one that made me look like a Vivi, essentially, from Final Fantasy IX? The lamprey are so annoying. That's true, too, for the finger ruins. The fact that it feels like a bad idea to be on Torrent because you can get artillery struck does suck. The hut? The hat? Oh, the hut. The one with the finger guy in Carlos Engrave. Wait, there's a hut there? Paisana hasn't gone to the Hidden Grave since the first run? Yeah. I think Vorb is getting auto-corrected too much. Anyway, so Tony said, the holdbacks of the base game are carried through. For example, we wish we had more side quests like putting Nefeli on the throne. We left power vacuums that are left behind most of the time. Yeah, I mean, I guess like the whole message is the power vacuums are supposed to be filled by us. But one of my biggest criticisms about the FromSoft formula is that if they really do want to encourage that idea of multiplayer a bit more, then they need to have more people alive in their worlds after we're done going through them. Because pretty much every time you go through a FromSoft game, you're the only one left standing. I guess there is Ronnie, but I mean, she's not even really alive, technically speaking. She's a spirit in a doll, which is just endlessly hilarious to me that our first canonical waifu is a doll. So essentially telling gamers to go hug their dakimakura, their, what are they called in English? Throw pillows? Full body pillows, right? Body pillows. Yeah, okay. Maybe they wanted those areas to have stealth necessary, but then again, if that was the idea, they didn't pull it off in the eyes of most people, yeah. Alright, so let's go back to the video.
Areas in this expansion just seem a lot bigger or emptier than they needed to be. You're exploring and you're looking around and there's just nothing sometimes, or there's really useless items that no one's going to care about. Some crafting material or a cookbook or smithing stones that you don't need anymore. So why is this? Why are there several areas that feel just a little too empty?
Yeah, so thinking about the Cerulean Coast and the grave again, every time I hopped onto one of the coffins and I got grave glovewort, I was a little bit disappointed. I think it's because they weren't novel, and I was hoping that eventually I'd get something different from hopping on all of these coffins and like parkouring a little bit awkwardly up them, but there was nothing. And I guess it's a lot of small stuff like that which kind of end up betraying the player's expectations, which make these places feel a bit more unrewarding. Now, I don't know if it would have been better to have nothing up there at all. Arguably not, but I guess even if they, you know how they had like the alternate larval tier? I think if they had stuff like that, but like more skidoo focused, it would have been a little bit of a smoother transition, I guess. The Finger Weaver's hovel. Okay, thank you, yeah. Each glovewort was a bigger disappointment than the last, exactly. Yeah, there's even like no lore for those areas, which is, as Vare would say, that's the part that irks the most.
Well, I have a theory about that. I think there's about 3 components that are going on here. First is for the 3 areas I mentioned that are especially empty, I think that is on purpose, and they really just are leaning as hard as they can into theme and vibes and the lore of the world. And I do think that is a bit of a misfire. I actually wonder if they're going to patch this expansion and add a little bit more stuff in those areas. And the second thing that's going on is the game is beautiful. It has amazing views and landscapes. There's so many incredible screenshots you can take all over this world. And they're so conscious of that I think that maybe contributed to things being bigger and grandiose than they needed to be for the sake of beauty. Okay. But I actually think it's the third thing that's driving a lot of this. This is maybe a crackpot theory, but here you go. This is a minor bit of a spoiler because I'm showing you something from the game, but it is in the very first area of the game. So if you don't want to know that, you can skip ahead a few seconds. Near the beginning of the DLC area is a tower that's called the Suppressing Tower. And here is what you can read if you go to the top of that tower. It says it's the very center of the lands between. And at first glance, that's pretty weird because if you just look at the map of the DLC area, it doesn't really seem to be in the center of that map. But what if you put the entire map of the DLC on top of the old map and you aligned it so that this tower was in the center of the old map? What would that look like? Well, here you go. And as you can see, it perfectly lines up. This must have been so satisfying to design. Think of the theme here. The whole expansion is called Shadow of the Erdtree, this concept of a shadow. And here we have negative space in the base game filled in perfectly by the lands of the expansion. It says a lot about the world and the lore, but I'm not going to get into that right now. What I am going to point out is that I think what this did is established before they even made the DLC content just how big it had to be, because it had to fit perfectly into that old map. And I think that might have contributed to some of these areas being kind of larger than they needed to be. Part 3.
Well, not only that, you can't necessarily make a small area bigger, but you can always fill up a bigger area with more items, as far as like game dev goes. And so it's a problem where it's a little bit over designed. Maybe how do I want to explain it? Like, it's better to have too much than not enough, and it turns out we just got not enough because they gave us too much, which doesn't make sense when you think about it, like literally speaking. But they just didn't go back and add enough things to make these super large areas feel more grounded or like part of a bigger whole, I guess. And then Global was saying, the lack of any textual lore for Cerulean Coast and Karos did bum them out a bit. To Ratatosker's point, you have to give people some goods up front sometimes. Sometimes, yeah. Where exactly would the Divine Towers be in each area of the Lands of Shadow? So about that infographic, I don't think it really works out the way that it's presented. And this is something that I still need to do, and I'm probably going to say this for like a year now, like year starting from now, that I tend to think that the shattering altered both physicalities of both locales, in that parts of them seem to be broken in ways that they should have been whole before. And I think the overall map layout, when you just put them on top of each other as they are, doesn't show how they should have been, if that makes sense.
Why is it always down or more on map design? The world of this expansion has an incredible amount of verticality. What I mean by that is that you'll be somewhere in this expansion and you'll see that right next to you is a really high cliff and there's stuff up there. If only you could get there somehow. And you look down and there's another cliff, and way down there, there's a whole other area that maybe you could get to somehow. And you can see that even if you could get to that area, there's another cliff down from there to a whole other area. So you're seeing so much right next to you that you can't quite get to. And that's very interesting. That's something that the base game of Elden Ring did. It's something that FromSoft games have done many times in the past. But what I'm trying to convey to you here is that the degree that they're doing this is way, way, way more than any of those games did. In fact,
yeah, I was actually really suppressed and a little bit awestruck my first time in the DLC and looking down to see the Cerulean Coast from the Gravesite Plains. And so I spent an inordinate amount of time scouring the south and southeast portions of the Gravesite Plain and then the eastern portion to try to figure out a way to go there, only to realize that I couldn't go that way. And so I spent a lot of time blindly trying to fumble my way that direction, and it kind of turned me off from some parts of the exploration in the very beginning, because it felt really shut off and cloistered away, in that I was kind of artificially held into almost an island, funneling me towards the Divine Tower or the Castle Ensis, and I really had to go out of my way to explore what I wanted to initially. And once I got over the bridge going towards Castle Ensis, it wasn't that big a deal because I could finally go off the way that I wanted to. But for that first maybe 2 hours, I felt a little bit shoehorned, I suppose. And then Stowboat was saying, World of Warcraft had the opposite problem in Shadowlands, ironically, where there were too many things clustered together to the point of being unable to take a couple steps without getting in combat. I know what you mean. I did play a bit of Shadowlands back in the day, and now I'm like kind of completely over WoW, I think. And part of that is also due to like how poorly they implemented scaling in their DLCs, in that if you tag too many monsters or like they become aggro against you, you're just going to die. Especially at the beginning of their campaign in the Shadowlands, where you couldn't even like walk anywhere to begin with. You just had to like pretty much crawl everywhere. It was an awful entry into an expansion. And this isn't entirely relevant to your point or even like the Shadowlands DLCs. But one of my biggest complaints about the World of Warcraft is that it's been a stale world for 2 decades now. Ever since Cataclysm, they haven't gone back and like really updated any of the old towns or given anyone a reason to go back to some of their faction capitals, like not Orgrimmar, but Thunderbluff. Like, who the hell hangs out in Thunderbluff or like the Blood Elf village and whatnot? So anyway, that's kind of off subject.
I can't think of another example in any video game that approaches what they're doing here. So this property of the world, this verticality, is it a good or bad thing design-wise? And I'm going to say, conceptually, it's very good. The designers want to create an interesting, breathtaking world, and this helps do that. The designers want to create a kind of puzzle and how to get from here to there, and this does that. It's honestly really impressive. But there is a big negative, and I don't think that this big negative is conceptual or inherent. It just has to do with the details of how this came together, and it's really unfortunate. There were multiple times over my course of playing through this expansion where there were large portions of the map that I hadn't got to and I couldn't figure out how to get to, and it just turns out you can ride there. Like, it's not exactly a puzzle or a very difficult one. It's just that, there was a place I'd been to many times and you could jump down the rocks in a certain area that I happened not to have seen. And you might think, I was rushing through, I wasn't being very observant. No, that is not true. I was being super careful, and I just happened to not see 2 or 3 ways to go here or there. And that is not a big complaint. Please don't think.
I wonder where he's talking about, because it could either like make or break the story, but I don't know.
That's my point. I missed a couple things and I'm salty about it. No. I'm just letting you know where I was coming from. So what I realized from that if I had looked even more carefully at just how to jump down here or there, that I could have gotten to those areas without much trouble. What it made me do naturally is look more carefully everywhere else. These 2 or 3 areas.
And that's kind of a double-edged sword, because it is really fun to explore it and find something that's a little bit hidden. But then it becomes a bit fatiguing if you're just trying to literally hit every wall in every area of the game and find nothing for 99.9% of them. But that 0.01, baby, it's like freaking free run trying to open a chest and hope that it's not a mimic. Anyway.
Were not the only ones in the map that I had trouble accessing. There were many other huge areas that I could see that they existed.
All right, so the point that I wanted to go back to was like, it's annoying when you can see something but have no tangible way of getting to it, because in a lot of FromSoft's games, if you see something, you can kind of get to it fairly quickly or within the context of that region. So for me, it was really annoying trying to find a way to access that Crucible Knight in Shifa River from Shifa River. And I spent way more hours fumbling around for what would ultimately be no way to access it other than like way later, which kind of sucked. But I mean, it wasn't the end of the world. And that happened to me a couple times throughout the base game and the DLC, but that's the one that sticks out to my mind.
trouble accessing. There were many other huge areas that I could see that they existed. I just couldn't figure out how to get there. So I would go to the edge of a cliff and look down to where I can't go and thought, well, what if I followed this cliff all the way around one way and all the way around the other way, and just looked very carefully. And I did that so much for so long, for hours and hours, that it really became the defining experience of the whole DLC for me.
I can definitely understand that, because I did something extremely similar for trying to get into the Abyssal Woods region when I hadn't gotten there yet. And so I explored over by not Bonnie Village, but the other place, like the Morth Ruins, where it goes into like the poison swamp with the Gravebirds. I explored that this exact same way, like looking down the cliff to see if there's any way I could like hop down there. Then I checked everything over by Manus Metyr. There was nothing. I checked the Cerulean Coast. There was nothing. Then at that point, I was like, well, did I really check all of the Morth Ruin area? So I did that again. Then I was like, well, maybe there was something by the Cerulean. Well, I did that again. And so it kind of sucks when you don't know what you don't know. And it seems like you should be able to get to a place. So... Warm Cup of Cocoa, I like the name. Welcome in. Bruh, same. Okay. So it seems like this has been a bit more of a common experience after all. Vorb spent a stupid amount of time trying to get past the furnace golem you have to throw a pot into. Which one? But yeah. Captini said in Sekiro, it took you like 10 hours for you to find the path behind that one shrine down to Canyon. You went there like 5 times, but for some reason you never looked down that path. That sucks. Vorb was hugging every wall in the Abyssal Woods trying to get a map fragment, and then everything further south because you hadn't gone to the coast. Oh, to get the map fragment down there first? That's funny. Yeah. So when I was in the coast, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get to that map fragment for the Abyssal Woods. So it kind of works both ways, I guess. Stoatboat had trouble looking for Mesmer's door and you accidentally died from a high drop, but somehow managed to tickle the stake of Marika near his door. That's awesome and hilarious.
Day 1, I was on a new adventure and I was fighting bosses and doing pretty well, even though the bosses are kind of hard. Day 2, beat some more bosses. Great. Day 3, I found a ladder in a tower that I couldn't get to, and the tower is super complicated and confusing, and I spent all day trying to get to that ladder. If you played this, you know which one I mean. Probably the second half of...
I'm assuming he means the specimen storeroom and the place that you need to approach from the back. So yeah, if you approached it from the front, oh yeah, I didn't even think about how tantalizing that must have been. That sucks.
Of my latter day was...
Vorb had that experience too. You're so lost trying to get to that loft. That sucks.
Riding around the world and looking at cliff sides. And then the 4th day was pretty much entirely riding around the world and looking at cliff sides. It got just way more boring for me really quickly when it became, how do I get to these other areas? Instead of the adventure I feel like I was supposed to be on. And what I found very...
Yes, this is actually a really good point that I felt as well, but I just hadn't thought to express. So this has been a really good video.
Very annoying as a player is that the answer to how to get to some of these key big areas is actually not to be more observant while riding around them, as I had mentioned happened to be earlier. It's going to entire other parts of the game and doing a little thing or noticing a little thing that you would just kind of not know to do. There's one in particular that in order to do the thing you have to do, I feel like you pretty much just have to look that up in a guide. And there's another where there is kind of a way to go, but it doesn't really look like anything and it's so easily missable. And yet...
So I'm assuming he's talking about the Marika O Mother statue and the painted room specifically in the Shadowkeep, which goes to the manse. Which, yep, he's definitely right about this.
It's the gateway to a whole other big part of the game. And what I'm emphasizing here is that it wasn't that I was near that other part of the game and looking for a way to get in. There was kind of no way to ever guess that the way to get in was to go to this completely other zone. And even though I know all of this is very much in the vibe of FromSoft. They just don't give a fuck about if you're lost or don't know what to do or have to look at a guide or whatever. And I really tried to avoid guides, by the way.
Yeah.
I know all of that, but it's just so extreme. This world that they built is incredible. The level design that they've created is incredible, but I wish that it just wasn't so much about how to get down, about how to find a cliff to jump down or how to do a thing that you would never guess to do that ultimately leads to you going down an elevator somewhere. The devil.
Yeah, and this is kind of a hard issue to tackle in some ways, I think, because players want to discover secrets, but players simultaneously hate secrets. And why do I know this? It's because it's me. I'm players. It always feels amazing to kind of discover something on your own, and then it always feels hair-rippingly, frustratingly bad to know that there's something that you need to do, but you just don't know what. So being tantalized with the Abyssal Woods and the map fragment down there, maybe if there was no map fragment down there, I wouldn't have been guaranteed that there was a place to go, but I mean, I spent so long looking for it that I just gave up and decided to look at a guide, not because I was giving up at like searching for it, but because I knew it was a better investment of my time to put the game down and then go to a website and like look up other things, even though there could be spoilers for other stuff that I wasn't trying to look up, just because this thing was annoying me that badly, because I didn't know that what I was doing was never going to work. So that is definitely a huge point of frustration.
In the detail of tuning, and this stuff about getting to these certain areas just didn't work for me. I didn't have the aha moments, and I didn't even feel satisfied when I finally realized how it did work. I think it just needs a few more clues or something. As I'm sure you can see, I'm kind of conflicted about this because I do feel like I should point out the negatives of how a lot of my experience was running around being lost and not knowing how to get a place, and that's kind of bad. But at the same time, I have so much appreciation for this level design. There's a certain keep, and I'm sure you know which one if you've played this expansion, that once you fully understand how it's put together and what it leads to and what the 3D model of this place fully looks like, if you could, look at an editor and move it all around, is so intricate and incredible that, I can't help but be in awe of it. So there's a lot to love here as well. Here's a minor gripe, but I think it's worth pointing out. It is a small design detail that really does have an effect on the fun factor of the game, and that is smithing stones. Smithing stones are a crafting material that you use to upgrade your weapons, and I'm not going to critique how that works in the base game. I'm just going to take that as given. You use a bunch of smithing stones and you power up your weapon, and you're expected to have a fully powered up weapon by the time you reach the expansion. Not just one, I think you probably have multiple, and there's also something called bell bearings, which are items you can get in the base game that once you have those, you don't actually have to hunt down all the smithing stones anymore. You can just buy them. The placement of the bell bearings in the base game tells me a lot about what the designers want us to do. And the idea is that in the early game of the base game, you get, let's say, smithing stone 1, 2, and 3, and maybe 4. But at this point, they're like, okay, you've gotten that far. We're going to give you a way to just get as many 1s and 2s as you want from now on. And then you can get access to 5 and 6, and they're like, okay, at this point, we're going to let you have all of the 3s and 4s that you want. Now, I know all the details. I know that that's not exactly correct, but that's basically how it works. So by the time you reach the expansion, you're expected to have all those bell bearings, and it is trivial to just upgrade any weapon to max. It's trivial, but it's not instant. You have to click on a menu like 10 or 20 times, or on a different one,
I do wish that they learned the lesson from Dark Souls Remastered and allowed you to fully upgrade or spend all your things in one go. Because I got to tell you, it really sucks on going back to my blessing list playthrough and going back and then using all my blessings if I want to just quickly overscale things. and needing to apply each Erdtree blessing one at a time really sucks, rather than being able to dump multiple into it.
25 or 50 times, because I think you click once and then there's a confirmation. So even clicking through it takes time, but also there's the material and the money that you need to do that process. And so you've got to farm that money, and it's not hard. It doesn't take that long, but it's not actually adding anything to the game. Now let's go back to talking about the expansion, where this issue really seems like.
And that's kind of always been one of my bigger criticisms about the economies of these games, that I do think that there should be some costs for some things, but it just quite often ends up feeling more tedious to me than enriching the game. And I don't know what the most elegant of solutions is for that. I think for consumables, they should be non-consumable for a lot of them, and just become tools, and the max amount that you can carry should be upgradable, kind of like how the ritual pots and the normal pots work right now, but better.
Like a problem. So you're in this new DLC world and you find a new sword or something and you pick it up, and can you use it? Well, it's garbage. And what you have to do is farm a little bit and have enough runes and go buy all the smithing stones and then max it out. And now you can use it. So why is that? It doesn't actually add anything. It's just really annoying. Every time you find a new weapon, and that happens many, many times in this DLC, that weapon is a useless piece of garbage until you do this chore. And it feels like you shouldn't have to do that anymore once you've reached the DLC. All these new weapons probably should have just dropped at max level, or maybe a better idea than that, to enable challenge runs to exist still, is let them drop as useless garbage, but have a new mechanic where you can just instantly upgrade it to max trivially. If that existed, the game wouldn't be any easier at all, but it would be less tedious. The spell.
Exactly. And I think this is kind of funny, but I'm pretty confident that Elden Ring also doesn't have the equivalent of the like Fire Link sword, where you can just go back to a side of grace without losing your runes, which is probably because they overlooked it because fast travel is so abundant. But it would be nice to have stuff like that for going into dungeons and stuff, I guess, or I don't know. Yeah.
Casting you.
Paisan's probably the minority here, but you're pro tedium in games. Tedium is good though. I would disagree. So there's a difference between what I would say like grinding is versus tedium. And that might sound like the exact same thing because grinding can be tedious. But for me personally, there is an aspect of grinding which I find can be very enjoyable if it's done well. And a lot of that tends to tie into like the core feedback loop of games in many cases, or maybe not the core, but maybe some subsidiary stuff. So going back to like my bell curve of games and whatnot, and how I gave Dynasty Warriors a 5 out of 10, bro, all you're doing is mowing down essentially the same dude literally 1,000 to 2,000 times in every map. But you know what? It's kind of fun. It's tedious, but it's enjoyable in its own right. And that to me is very different than feeling like, okay, now I need to stop focusing on what I want to do to focus on something else that I need to do so I can go back to doing the thing that I want to do. And that aspect gets a bit more tedious to me than just continuing killing my 1,000 warriors, because one is worth 1,000 in Dynasty Warriors. All right, Vorb, I like that.
Why? The controls to cast spells in the base game of Elden Ring is really the weakest part of the entire game, in my opinion. You can hold up to 10 spells, or 12 if you use an item that no one would use. And in order to cycle through those, you got to go up, up, up through a linear list. And the only extra tool you have is that if you hold up, you can jump to the very first item in the list. But it's excruciating to use. It makes casting spells way more cumbersome and annoying than it really should be.
And it makes having more spells become more of a hindrance than something that's like build enabling or fun to use, which is why I tend to prune a lot of the spells that I don't feel like I'm actively using on my list. So yeah, I definitely agree that the UI should use a lot of updating, and I hope they take some inspiration from games like Lords of the Fallen with the way that they implemented that system. Oh no, global sequence just learned. Holding up does what? Yeah, so this is an integral part of a HUDless playthrough, that if you hold up or down, it will cycle to the first thing in that list relative to what you're using. So, yeah. Tony says, From could learn a lot from Wukong or God of War. Forbes says, it's partially subjective, but tedium versus fun is basically depending on whether the mechanics and gameplay loop trigger the dopamine hits and stuff in your brain to keep you engaged. Right. So I think for Serlin and myself, going back to upgrade a weapon to be at the point that I'm at now tends to feel a bit more tedious than dopamine inducing when I'm just trying to find something that I like and see if it's like actually effective at the same degree that I'm currently using things. And there's a lot more of a cost associated with upgrading weapons specifically rather than other forms of the content.
So many times I feel like I'm losing to the UI rather than to the boss, and it really just shouldn't be this way. I think it's okay to be a huge fan of Elden Ring and to really love what they did, but to critique this one element as just not being good enough. I really hope that people do not show up in the comments of this video and say, actually, it's totally fine to scroll through a 10-item linear list one at a time in the middle of combat. No, it isn't. Have some kind of quality bar. Okay, let's do things a better way than that.
And oh man, I kind of forgot how terrible it was, and I'm so glad that they finally patched it, even though it doesn't affect me because I've like played the game at this point. And anyway, having it so that way you automatically summon NPCs when you walk over their summon signs and not having to move your thumb to the D-pad to cycle left or right to go to confirm or deny is so much better. And it should have been implemented a long time ago. God, the Egon fight in Bale, trying to just find that opening amount of time to not get got by Bale to summon freaking Egon was awful. Or having to resummon Torrent. I still think they need to buff Torrent's health bar, but anyway, that's a bit of a different subject. Tony says, at least if you insist on making your game based around controllers in terms of spell management. So I don't think, this might be a little bit controversial, but I don't think PCs offer a better system unless you're using something crazy like a gaming mouse, like an MMO mouse that has at least 9 buttons on the side in terms of managing your hotbars and stuff. But there's a lot of ways that it can be implemented pretty well in a game like Elden Ring. So one of my favorite things about Elden Ring is the addition of that quick bar, essentially, where if you hold square and then allocate things to up, down, left, or right, you get that like second little menu. That is really nice. And there are other ways to implement, let's say, shortcut hotkeys like that, which could help alleviate some of these woes with the allocation of items and resources and whatnot.
I really wish that enough people complained about this that we could see some kind of patch or better system. An example is Ghost of Tsushima has a really great system where you hold down R2 and then you instantly have access to 8 moves. The 4 face buttons do 4 of the moves and the 4 D-pad directions do another while you're holding down a button. I have a whole UI.
I was muted. I said, yeah, stuff like that would be really good. I kind of forgot about them doing that in Sushi Ghost.
In mind that would let you cast all of your spells very quickly and still be able to do all your Ashes of War. It's possible. It's doable. And I was really disappointed and a bit surprised that the expansion did nothing on this. If this were a normal review rather than a game design analysis, I would cover a lot of the content of the game, but I'm not going to do that here. There is a ton of content. There's so many new weapons and spells and ashes of war. And there's so many areas and bosses. There's just a huge playground, and a lot of it is really fun. I also don't want to spoil it and show you all those things. I just want to say that I appreciate almost all of it. I know that there are a lot of complaints about the bosses in this expansion. So that's really the one part of this content I wanted to cover from a design point of view. What's going on with these bosses? Okay, in the base game, there's a situation where you can summon these ghost spirits to help you fight, and it makes the fights way easier. It's basically a built-in difficulty system. And I have played the base game many times over in many builds. I played it with spirit summons. I played it without summoning a single spirit the entire run. I know the ins and outs of this. It's a lot harder to play the game without spirits, but it's completely doable. The expansion feels different.
Ooh, baby. I feel vindicated.
I went in.
I mean, not really. I feel vindicated by my own opinion, but it is nice to not feel completely isolated about that.
Into it thinking I would try the whole thing without summoning a single spirit again. And it's just so hard that it feels like it's tuned for you to use the spirits. And I think that's putting a lot of people off. The bosses are so aggressive and in your face that the spirits feel more necessary than they were before. I guess I don't have a very strong opinion about that. I mean, you could say that's maybe a negative about these bosses, or it could just be a skill issue. As we get more used to fighting these bosses, maybe this will seem like less of a thing over time. I'm not really sure at this point. That's most of what I have to say. And even though I had some negatives, I really want to emphasize that this expansion is beautiful and intricate, and it's a huge new playground, both physically, but also with all of the new weapons and items and spells and bosses. There's just so much to do that I hope you give it a try if you liked Elden Ring at all. And also, it's really fun reading everyone's dumb messages. So good luck, fellow Tarnished, and I'll read whatever you write in game.
Right. So that was a really good video. I definitely appreciated a lot of the perspectives that he provided in regard to game design and like the math and stuff, because that is something that I never would have really have thought to consider on my own, but makes a lot of sense. He's terrified of attracting the trolls. I mean, so if you're on the YouTube and you're a smaller channel like this, you are very likely to see pretty much all of the comments that you get, and some people just can't really handle a lot of negative criticism or feedback, and I don't mean that like in any kind of way to put him down or say like oh, you should just like suck it up, Buttercup. It just it's a lot easier for the negatives to weigh on people's minds than to look at the positives, and I'm not like an exception to that by any means. So you have to also admit that setting my community aside, because we're pretty insular, and the type of people that tend to interact with my community on a more involved level tend to be a bit more level-headed than a lot of the greater Elden Ring FromSoft community fan base. And because of that, I tend to get more leveled out comment sections. And the whole reason why I'm saying this is because if you really look at the vast majority of Elden Ring content creators, there's a lot of trash in the comments, which is just not fun to deal with. And there's so many people who will blindly defend the FromSoft games from any sort of perceived criticism, whether accurate or not, that it becomes very tiring and taxing dealing with many people who are very clearly bad actors and not actually interested in a discussion or any kind of like constructive criticism. They just don't want to hear anything bashing what they like for whatever reason. So, yeah. Just say you're insular? Well, are you? But no, I'm not trying to imply anything about any of you guys specifically, but I'm sure you all know what I mean. So Paisan was disagreeing with his comments about the boss aggression. So this came out July 1st, which is about 10 days after the release. And it probably took him a day or two to produce this. So you could say that this was probably made within like 8 or 9 days of the DLC coming out. So maybe a little bit more than a week. Vorb said that you think one issue is the bosses tend to have a lot of HP and a lot of builds depending on getting procs and stance breaks. So it gets annoying when you spend more time dodging than getting big damage. I can agree with that. Corin says, you teach religion as a believer. Trust you when you say you understand. Trust. And then Vorb said, we've gotten more used to all the bosses. That's true as well. So, yeah, I quite enjoyed this video. Wonder if you talk some more about FromSoft or just stuff like this in general. The guy who smashed the ethics in games discussion sounds interesting. I don't know if this is like the best stuff for me to stream, but I might like look at this stuff personally. Is this Skara? It does, but it does not look like Skara. No, I don't think that is. Now I feel kind of messed up for saying that. Anyway. Yeah, so I've gone ahead and liked the video, and I've shared it with you guys here in the chat if you want to give him some support. Oh, so Paisan was disagreeing about the punish windows. You saw a video yesterday that actually did the math on how often each boss has a punish window. On average, all the DLC bosses had a punish window every 5 seconds or so. Those numbers are for hitless fights too. Okay, so I do have some questions about that. You might need to like share the video or something, but I wonder how much that incorporates things like action time responses as well as build variety and positioning, and whether or not they're like on a heavy run or not heavy run, heavy dodge, medium dodge, or light dodge or roll. And then of course, like a lot of it really comes down to just familiarity with the bosses, which is the whole get good argument. And then Vorb said, there's the anecdotal subjective experience of the average player and then the min-maxed ideals. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is what I imagine is going on in Paisan's videos, where it's talking about things from a min-maxed angle, which might end up being a bit unintuitive to the average player. So, okay, everybody. I'm not sure actually what I want to stream tomorrow. I was unironically thinking of potentially playing the, what are they called? The Mega Man Zero collection games, because I've never played them, and I've always been a really big fan of the Mega Man games, and I kind of am at a lull as to what I want to do up until The Legend of Link gets released, because I kind of want to stream that game, because it seems like it'd be a fun, comfy stream type game. But yeah, I feel like we're kind of at the point where I've watched a ton of the Shadow of the Erdtree stuff, and I'm getting toward the end of the new content, unless I just keep watching the same content creators, which I'm kind of fine with doing, but I also don't want to like overstay my welcome or just only hear from one perspective for too long at a time. You want to see me play the Nier games at some point? That might be doable. I guess I would need to see how well my computer can handle playing Nier as well as like streaming and recording, because I'm definitely interested in Nier Automata. It's been a game on my to play list for a very long time, but that also seems like a game that would take like probably a month or longer to stream. It's like 3 hours at night. It definitely seems like a 60-hour game or something like that. Played Drakengard 3? I don't really know anything about Drakengard now that you mention it. Just kidding. Oh, you got me. Okay, I'll figure it out. I'll post if I, change course or whatnot, and keep you guys filled in on the details. So anyway, we'll be going live at the same time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time regardless. So hopefully we'll catch you then. And until then, take care. Stay safe. Last Protagonist out.